G'day. Well, we're at your disposal for 3 hours.
Yeah. Whatever you would like to talk about.
So we're going to go through it far away around.
I just want to learn more about the spiritual principles and how we can really get a grasp of those for our own life.
Yeah, so this is something that we've been talking about a lot with people as we've been travelling as well. And for the most part, most people who hear Divine Truth firstly start to generally focus on trying to have a relationship with God. They try prayer, and then they can't really feel much from God at all. And because they can't feel much, they go, well, is that even working or not? Don't really know. And then, of course, there's many people who feel things, but are from spirits rather than from God. So there's those problems as well. And in that process, most people then start to feel like, well, I've got to sort out my feelings, like I've got to sort out my emotions as to what I feel about God and what I feel about myself. So a lot of people start focusing a lot on their feelings, like their emotions. But they forget that everything in God's universe is really based upon principles, not emotions. And emotions are the brain of your soul. The emotions are the brain of your soul. But they are subsequent to your experiences. So as we talked about when we were away, you basically have, in your soul, you've got sensory apparatus, which is very similar, but a superset of the sensory apparatus of your physical body. So you got your sense of touch, taste, smell, those kind of hearings, sight. These things are a part of creating your experience. But then on top of that, you've got your emotions of what you feel about those experiences. So when you see a beautiful view, how do you feel? Like when you see somebody hurting somebody else, how do you feel? When somebody physically harms you and the sense of touch goes from being pleasurable to painful, how do you feel? And then, of course, there's also other senses, such as your emotional senses. And those senses allow you to experience everything emotionally rather than just in your mind. That without the emotional experience, you wouldn't be able to assess whether something's pleasurable or painful, really. And because the emotions are what causes you to be sensitive to those things. And with humans, of course, we also have memory. So all of this combines to create a memory of your life. So that way, right the way from the time you were incarnate, right from the time you were conceived, all the way through to now, you've basically had a long list of experiences which have all been recorded and stored in your soul. Now that those experiences have been recorded and stored, many of them you will find have been out of harmony with God's love. In other words, we've chosen to do things, or others have chosen to do things to us, which have been out of harmony with God's love. And every time something is out of harmony with God's love, fundamentally it's what you would classify as a sin. In other words, it's an event or a thought or an emotion or an idea or a concept, but it can be any of those things. But it can be an action, a behaviour, any of those things. And any of those things that are out of harmony with God's love, God's loving principles, is a sin. Now, a lot of times when people start trying to develop a relationship with God, they're more focused on how do I feel, trying to get feel God's love for them and things like that, but they're frequently not awakened to their sin. Now, to awaken to your sin, you need more than just your emotions. Because your emotions are a measuring stick in terms of your own experience, but they're not a measuring stick in terms of what God measures to be loving or not loving. And so many times, if you're in an addiction in particular, you have emotions that say, oh, this is really good. But from God's perspective, you could be breaking a law. Right? An example of that is, let's say you're in a marriage or a partnership, and your partner is doing things for you all the time and you expect them to do things for you all the time. So in other words, you're not treating it as a gift of whatever they give you. Under those circumstances, you've got an addiction. That addiction is a sin out of harmony with God's love. And you can feel that you're righteous having that sin. You can feel, as many of you already know, right? You can feel that when I do the thing that brings me joy, it feels right. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right from God's perspective. And this is why we need to understand the concept of principles. The difference between a principle and how you feel about something. So an example of that is, let's say, the way the soul works is the soul's emotions are the brain of the soul. Right? So it's the way the soul thinks is through your emotions. Now, if you're suppressing your emotions, you're suppressing your soul's brain. Right? Under those circumstances, you're breaking a principle of how the soul works. So whenever you break a principle, there is going to be a natural consequence that's painful because you broke the principle. So every time you suppress your emotions, as an example, you are breaking the law, and therefore there is a compensatory process that occurs because pain will result when you break the law. And so if you break a fundamental law, for example, regarding how the soul works, then of course your soul is not going to work so well. And that is going to have its own consequences, which are all going to lead to quite a lot of pain, right? And if we live in harmony with the principle, then we can understand that just because I have a feeling about something and I feel it's right, I feel I'm righteous, it doesn't actually mean that I am. And what determines whether I am righteous or not is really the principle. And how in harmony with the principle I am will determine how righteous I am from God's perspective. Right? Now, of course, every time we break a principle, if you think about it, God's personality is inbuilt in the principle. So every one of God's laws is really an expression of God's personality. It's what God likes. Right? So the law is what God likes. So every time we break the law, we're doing the things that God doesn't like. Right? And whether we're doing them on purpose or we're doing them not on purpose, well, obviously that's also measured, because if you do something on purpose, then of course that's worse than doing something by mistake. Right? But either way, it's something that God's personality didn't like. And that's why the law has been established, and that's why the principles are so important. So every law, of which there's millions of laws, every law is based on a principle. So if you can learn the principles, then you don't have to learn the laws. If you understand the fundamental principles, of which, fundamentally there's less than 100 of those, if you understand the basic fundamental principles, then you can understand why the laws were created and why, whenever you do something out of harmony with the principles, you must be breaking a number of laws while you're doing it, and also why there must be a penalty associated with it. And when you start focusing on your progress like that, and just letting yourself feel your emotions still as a sub point of it, like your emotions are like, as I said when we were travelling, your emotions are ant emotions, In regard to the universe itself, there's billions of people having emotions. And so you're one of billions of people having emotions. It's like, for each individual, your emotions matter because that's what creates happiness or unhappiness. So obviously for you, your emotions matter. But when it comes to the universal concept of things, your emotions don't really matter very much at all. And when I say that, what I mean is that from God's perspective, God wants you to have happy emotions. But if you have sad ones, God doesn't think it's the end of his universe just because you have sad emotions. I know you think so. You think it's the end of his universe, right? But God does not think that way. In fact, God's basically saying, well, unhappy emotions happen as a result of the unhappy or the unprincipled choices you've been making. And this is why the unhappy emotions are going to happen. Now, sometimes you store unhappy emotions rather than feeling them, and so some of your unhappy emotions are past emotions that you chose not to have. Now you're going to have them, type of thing. But either way, they're all still based on principles. So if you learn the principles, you can start treating your emotions as just a byproduct of your life rather than the important thing in your life. And you can focus on the principle being the important thing because you know that the understanding the principles in harmony with God's love will bring you happiness as a guarantee. It will be guaranteed happiness as long as you understand the principle. Whenever we're unhappy, and you see this a lot in Christian faiths and other faiths, Muslim faith and other faiths that do believe in a God, you can see that oftentimes people feel they're unhappy, but they don't associate their own unhappiness with the fact that they broke one of God's principles, right? And quite often what's written in the book, like the Bible or the Quran or another holy book, is not based on God's principles either. And so, of course, a lot of people think they're living by the book, but they're still unhappy. So, well, if they understood the principles, they'd understand, well, that makes sense, because if I break a principle, I'll be unhappy, whether I'm living by a book or not. As my explanation of doing it, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the book says. What matters is what is the principle. And if the book agrees with the principle, then of course I'll be happy. But if the book disagrees with the principle and I follow the book, then I'll be unhappy. And so most of us don't think that way. Most of us are more worried about just our own personal feelings than anything else. So the very first thing that's really important to understand is that if you live by the principles, happiness is guaranteed. Right? If you don't live by the principles, unhappiness is guaranteed. Right?
And it's not just happiness, is it? It's sort of growth towards the person that God created you to be, isn't it? It's
higher potentials are possible.
Higher potentials in your own self-expression, your own self-knowledge. They're the natural result of living by principles as well.
Yeah. So I said all that running in answer to your question because, and we can focus in on the individual principles, but the very first thing to understand is why they are so important. Does that make sense? And we could talk a lot of hours just discussing why the principles are so important and why understanding their importance is such a big part of whether you're going to be happy or not. Yeah. If you understand the principle, then everything else can sort of, everything else in your life can be drawn to happiness if you understand principles. But if you don't get the principle, you can process emotions for another 1,000 years, and at the end of the day, you'll still be processing the same emotions if you're not careful, because you never understood the principle as to why you're still having that particular emotion over and over again. Yeah.
So is it, if you are unhappy in our lives, is it, we just really pray about what principles are we breaking to create love?
Yeah, I think a good thing to do at the beginning is just to assume you're breaking every one of them. and then work sort of from that point. Yeah, most of us would understand, wouldn't we, that if we're talking about a universal creator who created everything, then that creator must know everything. And in comparison to what that creator knows, we must know, and particularly when we're just conceived, we know next to nothing, right? And in fact, at the point of conception, you could say you fundamentally know nothing, and aside from some, you could say, built-in instinctual things that God built into the soul and built into the two bodies, the spirit body and the physical body, that cause you to do things, but you don't know about them, you just do them, And so fundamentally, at the time of conception, we know nothing. After then, we're starting to learn things. Now, initially, in the womb, mostly what we're learning is actually emotional. So we're absorbing emotions from our parents, particularly from our mother, and we're absorbing emotions from the environment. And so at that point, you could say the first part of our learning is the development of the soul's brain, the emotions of our life. That's happening right from the beginning in the womb. And then, of course, as we learn language and our mind develops in our bodies, because we've got a spirit body and a physical body, both with minds that develop, and they develop genetically and grow just like you would expect anything else to grow. And as those things develop, then of course you learn to use your mind more and more and more. But the very first thing you ever learnt to use in the womb was actually your soul's brain, which is the emotions of everything. And they are the things you absorb the most during that phase of your life. And then, of course, as you grow up and you change and you develop and go through puberty and have a lot of other experiences, then, of course, there's a lot of other parts of you that are developing as well. But the very first thing that God designed us to develop was our emotional experience. The storage of our emotional experience. You could say the memory of our emotional experience will often define what we choose to then choose in the future to have as experiences as well.
Wow.
All right. So discussion about principles, very important. So of all the things you could learn, the thing that is the highest thing to learn is a principle. And of all the things you could come to do in your life, the highest thing you can do is to live by those principles. And that, if you think about it, makes sense, because those principles are an expression of God's personality through the law. And so naturally, if you live by principles, you are naturally more close to God than you would be if you didn't live by those principles.
It helps you make quick decisions too. You
Yeah.
don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's the best thing. If you understand the principle, you know which way to head. And that helps your faith as well, because the more you act in harmony with the principle, the better the outcomes are, as long as you're humble in that process, which is another part of the principle. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Nikki? You just pass them up.
Hey guys. So when it comes to awakening to your sin,
Yep.
so for example, like the principle of redemption,
Yep.
how does that work when it comes to awakening with your sin? Because, like I know I need to go awaken to my sin for my relationship with God to get better, but I just don't know how they work, like with awakening, and like how does redemption work in that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, redemption can only work after awakening. But let's look at what happens before awakening, because that's where most people on earth are. They haven't yet awakened. So every time you break a principle, you're sinning. So you could say that a part of the awakening process is awakening to the principle, the importance of it, the importance of living by it, and so forth. Does that make sense to you? So you could say on the negative side of it, if you look at it as pros versus cons, if we look at it, I want to awaken to the principle, then that's also naturally going to awaken you to the sins, isn't it? That is on the con side, the opposite of the principle. So again, a lot of times when we talk about awakening to sin, the average person gets pretty negative about it, and they start going, oh, I've got a lot of sins, and I just need to work from my sins, and look at me sinning there again, and look at me sinning there again, and they get sort of very, you could say almost depressed about their sin, I suppose, you could say, get very down about it. Many of you have been through that experience, right, where you look at it and you go, oh, there I go doing the same thing again, and isn't that terrible, and what do I do about that, and and then if you're not careful in that place, you can be quite negative as well, which of course then encourages negative influences in your life as well. Spirits come along who are also negative, and they encourage all that kind of negative thinking as well. And so, you know, it's good to know what your sins are, but God's really trying to help you awaken to the principle you're breaking, rather than to all the sins you're committing because of the principle you're breaking. Right? So God's goal is really to go is trying to help you go, here's the principle, and if you live by it, you will be happy, and if you don't live by it, you will be sad. Right? And there'll be consequences if you don't live by it that are all sad, painful. And if you live by the principle, there'll be consequences that are all happy, that are all pleasurable. Right? And so, in a lot of ways, you could say the process to awakening to sin is the same process as awakening to a principle. Make sense?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, how do you awaken to a principle? So the real question then becomes, well, what is the process of awakening to a principle that defines a lot of God's laws? Like, what is that process of awakening to a principle? And you can see, if you think about it a bit and you ponder about that a bit, you can also see in the process of awakening to a principle, you will also see every time you broke the principle. So therefore, you would also awaken to your sin. Can you see that? And this is where I see a lot of people, they get so embroiled in their emotional feelings about all of that, but they're not focused on the principle, awakening to the principles. They're just focused on whether they feel pain or don't feel pain. Now, if your only focus is on whether you feel pain or don't feel pain, you know, in other words, feel pleasure, then you're going to be highly likely, if you have addictions, to continue those addictions, right? And by the way, every addiction is a sin because it breaks so many principles. And if I knew the principles that every addiction I have broke, then I'd probably be more concerned about them than I actually am. Right? I'd be more concerned about seeing them, looking at them, examining them, because I want to get myself into more harmony with God's principles, or you could say more harmony with God's personality, or you could say it another way, more harmony with God's laws, because I know as I do that I get closer to God, but I also get closer to my own happiness, and also my own growth and fulfillment also improves as a result. So the real question then becomes, how do I awaken to a principle?
I've prayed, I've tried to feel stuff, tried to feel my false beliefs.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get something from God, sometimes
not.
Sometimes it's crickets outside, you know, and I'm like, okay, I'm not sincere there. So yeah, what things can you do? Like what stuff have I missed there?
Well, can you see it's quite tricky, isn't it? Because if your intention inside of yourself is that you don't want to know something, can you see that? You're highly unlikely going to know it. So, you know, you can see that on a physical level. Like, if you're not interested in gardening, then it's highly unlikely you'll know how to grow a plant. Makes sense, doesn't it? Like, if you're interested in it, then you'll be more likely, you'll know, or you'll want to find out. So one of the very first things that is important to develop is what I'd call a sub-aspect of humility, which is the desire for sincerity, the desire to actually know something because it has meaning. Right? Now, it's very hard to do that when you're coming from a place where all you've ever done in your life is meet your own addictions. And the majority of people are very sincere about meeting their addictions. You know, they're pretty keen on it.
Very interested,
Very
motivated.
interested in it.
Yeah.
You know, you feed one of their addictions and all of a sudden everybody, you know, perks up and feels quite happy. under those circumstances, not understanding their sin. And so you can see, on one hand, we're motivated to not know the principle. So then how do you change a motivation, which is like a runaway train, really, to not know a principle when God's saying, I would like you to know the principles because those principles will make you happier. And you're going, but I think my addictions make me happier than the principles will make me. And so fundamentally, most of us are in a deep sort of argument with God about what's of value. What we value is our addictions, and we don't value the principles. Right? So the first thing we need to start doing is coming to value the principles in order to make change. And obviously, as the more we value the principle, the more likely we'll be able to see our own times we break the principle, and therefore see our own sin, and therefore awaken to our own sin, and therefore have something real to pray about with God after that. But until we are prepared to actually do that for ourselves, understanding, of course, that nobody else has to do this for me. There is no Redeemer who's going to do this for me. There's no Saviour who's going to do this for me. It's something I'm going to have to do for myself. Once I come to that recollection, then of course I'll be at the stage then where I can go, do I want to? Do I want to know the principles? What's the point of it? Now, if you're steeped in your own addictions, you will feel there is no point to it. You will feel there's no point to understanding any principle. Because every addiction breaks a principle.
More than one. Usually.
More than hundreds, usually. Hundreds. Usually, I mentioned earlier that there's probably 100 or so identifiable principles, and when you have one addiction, you break all of them generally. Right? And so every addiction is really purposefully built to help you not understand the principles. So you're coming from a place where you want your addictions, you want your sin, and the purpose of that sin is to not understand the principle, and then you're saying, how do I come to understand the principle? Can you see?
Yeah, pretty hard.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
But you know how you're saying that you get to the point when you actually like, right, I want to know the principle. I'm finding there's so many emotions before you get to that point, like.
Well, that's true, there are. But your emotions are emotions.
True.
So they don't matter. If you've got to feel your emotions in order to come to understand the principle, then feel your emotions to do that. Like, go through them, let yourself have them. It's far better letting yourself have them and going through them than it is to not understand the principle, because it's the understanding of the principle that will bring your happiness. And so not holding on to your emotions, that doesn't bring you happiness. Your emotions have been designed to flow, to be expressed and leave you as an expression of your soul's brain. Have those experiences, but they are not an important part really in terms of they're not the thing stopping you from imbibing the principle. The thing stopping you is the belief that you shouldn't have to feel painful ones, right? Which is not the same as, so you've got, let's call them pleasurable emotions, shall we? And let's say there's painful emotions. Most of us go, I only want pleasurable emotions, I don't want any painful ones. But if I've been living in sin, I have got painful ones, guaranteed, right? So I'm living in sin, I've got painful emotions, what am I going to do? Right? At some point, I'm going to have to be prepared to experience some pain in order to come to understand the principle. But the average person doesn't want to be prepared to experience pain. They only want what they define for themselves in their current state as pleasure. That's what they want. And in that state, you are not going to be open to any principles. So you're going to have to, at some point inside of yourself, come to the conclusion that going through pain is a worthwhile thing in order to come to understand the principle. And It doesn't matter how many bad emotions you're going to have to feel in order to come to understand the principle, because if, let's say it's 15, 20 bad emotions you're going to have to feel in order to come to understand the principle is higher than those emotions.
Yeah, it's worth it.
It's
you know.
worth it. It's worth it. It's of value. Your sad emotions are not really of value. And the more you treat them as if they're not of value, the more likelihood you'll have to experience them and let them go. But if you treat them as if they are of value, then you're going to think, oh, my sad emotions are worth so much, they're worth sacrificing the principle, they're worth sacrificing my relationships, my friendships, they're worth sacrificing my relationship with God for, just to prevent my bad emotions, right? And obviously that principle, which is really saying there is things higher than your feelings, is being broken. And there are many, many things that are much higher than your feelings. Yeah. The feelings of two people are higher than the feelings of one. Are they not? And all of the feelings added together are still not as high as the principle. So the feelings of 1 billion people are not as high as the principle. So substantially, can you see, your feelings need to be had because it's a part of the soul and how it works. But they're not important compared to the principle. The principle is of a higher importance than your feelings about it. Right? So go through your feelings about it.
Your feelings are like the solid thing that's never moving, it's never leaving, it's an eternal part of God's universe.
You mean the principle?
The principle,
Yeah.
yeah. And your emotions are transient things. Every emotion. It's not a permanent thing. So we kind of hold on to this emotion and go, this is the, this is the truth. This is the problem.
Nostalgic, can't we, about our own emotions?
Yes.
Like, this means this is who I am.
This is my identity, and the principle we try to diminish, but it's the thing actually that's lasting.
Yeah. Permanent.
Yeah.
Your feelings just pass. One day you'll feel bad, next day, if you let it go, next day you'll be happy again.
Yeah.
And then one day you'll be happy, and then the next day you'll be happy in a different way.
Yeah.
And then the next day after that, happy in a different way again. And the feelings just pass through you, but the principles never change. They are solid, immovable. They are the things that are the governing force of the entire universe. Because they are associated with God's personality, they govern everything. They are far more important than any of us at this stage can really imagine. Right? So when are we going to internally, in my soul, when am I going to say, the principles are this much value, and my emotions, hardly any value at all? Like, when am I going to, most of us are going, but if I feel bad, why should I have to live by the principle? But if I feel bad, I shouldn't have to live by the principle. That's what most of us are doing. And in that place we're saying our emotions, our feelings, are more important, have higher value than the principle. Right? And God's going, no, you've got everything totally out of priority if you think that. The priority should be, the principle is important, and my emotions just can be felt and experienced and gone through and released, and they don't need to be stored anymore, and they don't need to be nursed anymore, and they don't need to be considered as of major value anymore. They just need to be had. Right? And eventually, if I live by the principle, the only emotions I will have will all be happy anyway. Right? So it's worth living by the principle because it creates emotions of happiness. Right? So the principle should become our focus. Now, if the principle is not our focus, then we've already got our entire priority system around the wrong way. Right? Because, and we're fundamentally saying how I feel is more important than universal issues. It's really what we're saying. We're saying how I feel is more important than God. It's more important than God's laws. It's more important than God's principles. It's more important than the way the universe has been made. How I feel about everything matters more than that. And obviously, if we think that way, we're being extremely arrogant.
And a little bit
And a little bit,
illogical, yeah.
a little bit of a nutcase, really.
Pretty illogical, yeah.
Right. And that's really how it is.
Yeah.
So if we understand the principles, you can see then, of course, feeling the emotions should be relatively easy. Right? Because we're saying to ourselves what I have to feel in order to get that principle in my heart, because that's the goal in the end, to have the principle written on your heart. Like it becomes a part of you so much that you can't break it. And so that's where you want to be. You want to be in that state. Now, of course, receiving God's love helps you get in that state, but you can't receive God's love while you're continually breaking all the principles all the time. So at some point, you're going to have to make some adjustment, which is the awakening to the principle, or you could call it the awakening to the sins. Because remember, the principle is the positive thing, and the sin is the thing we do when we break the principle.
It's what's created when we live outside of the principle.
That's right.
It's our creation out of harmony with God's creation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I can grasp the principles, can you see, I will also automatically come to grasp my own sins.
It takes a while, doesn't it, though? Because
Of course.
I was just wondering, like, because obviously you guys know the process and
Yeah.
the path and stuff. Like, how long does it take to, like, just because I can't remember last time I felt a good emotion, to be honest with you.
Well, it depends how much dedication you have to the principle as to how long it takes.
Right.
And in your case, Nikki, you haven't had a lot of dedication to the principles, so it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time. And the more principles you break and purposely want to continue breaking, the longer it's going to take. And you've been brought up, as you know, in a situation where your mother has basically treated you as if you're king in the family, right? And under those circumstances, a man who's been brought up in that environment generally believes himself to be greater than God. You know, that's how he acts, as if he is greater than God's principles. And so, you know, you're going to have to process quite a lot of anger about those principles being there in order to let go of the arrogance that gets developed in your childhood under those circumstances. But you can get rid of them pretty easy. They're easy. It's just a few emotions. But at the moment, they're emotions you don't want to have. And how long you don't want to have them is going to determine how long it takes to awaken to the sin. So fundamentally, you're in a battle with God, with the principle, really. And battles with God never work out very well, in the long run. But the average person continues those battles for quite significant long periods of time. You know, Mary and I have observed in the last 2,000 years, there's people that we've known 2,000 years ago who still are in the battle, like with God about the principle. They don't want to accept God's principle on a matter. And then there's others who accept it as soon as they hear it, almost. And they accept it because they're humble enough to go, my emotions don't matter anymore. What is, I just got to go through the emotions and work through the emotions so that I can understand and get this principle. And they do. And so we've seen people get rid of all of their false beliefs about all of God's principles within like 30 years. But we've also seen people not do it for 2,000. So it's got a lot dependent, isn't it, upon the fight that you have with the principle. Can you see? And what you're really asking as a question is really a sort of, you could say, a self-involved question, because it's really saying, but my case is special. You know, I don't understand how to get this principle. Well, I'm going, well, everybody's going to have to get it sooner or later, and it is a choice, an emotional choice sooner or later that you need to make, and you haven't wanted to make it So when are you going to want to make it is the answer to the question. You're asking how long, and I'm going, well, when you want to make the shift, it will be made. Not when you're ready, it'll be when you want to. This whole concept that people have, you hear it a lot in New Age circles, I'm not ready yet. Why wouldn't you be ready yet?
You're born ready.
God
Literally,
made-
you are literally born ready.
Yeah, God made you ready, right?
Yeah.
God designed you ready, and then we stuff all of that up through our own choices. But fundamentally, God designed us with our capacity of the brain, the soul, and the soul, the emotion, the capacity to experience it. You see, a child, as soon as it's born, begins experiencing its emotion immediately. All the emotion that it's already imbibed out of harmony with love from its parents, it starts experiencing. That's why children generally cry a fair bit after they're born, for some time. And the reason why is because they're releasing emotion they've already imbibed at this stage that's out of harmony with love. Now, they find it relatively easy to do. You find it relatively hard. Obviously, it's because of choices now being made that weren't being made then, as to why it's now hard. And most people don't want to face that it's a choice. Most people want to go, there's some magical thing outside of me that causes it to be so slow. It's like, why did God make it so hard? He didn't make it hard. He made all of these principles, and he made you, he designed your soul to live by them naturally, actually, just like a child would generally live by them if it hadn't been damaged. He made you able to live by them automatically, almost. Not quite instinctually, of course, but many times it's automatic.
Well, if you're sensitive to, as you start to experiment with your free will and have feelings, if none of that was shut down, you would almost, through not having to have any thought processes about it, begin to take on the principles, because you would feel, when I did that, there was pain.
The brain of the soul, the feelings, would be going, that felt bad, painful, don't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That felt good, do that more.
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally, that's what would be happening. Obviously, when you're fed addictions, that emotional connectivity is broken down. But again, it's a choice that we make to break that down. It's a choice that we make to get rid of the emotions that impede our ability to accept the principle. Yeah? So let's look at one principle. Right? Let's look at the principle of truth. The principle of truth is fundamentally saying, and by the way, we could talk about all the sub-aspects of truth for many, many years. Right, because there are many things involved in truth. But you can say there's some sub-aspects that are part and parcel of truth. One of them is honesty. One of them is transparency. Another one is openness. So we're talking about honesty, emotional honesty. Transparency, emotional transparency. Openness, emotional openness is what we're talking about there. Sincerity, another sub-aspect of truth as well, right? Wanting to portray ourselves as we are on the outside to reflect as we are on the inside, right? That's an aspect of truth. So this is a principle that, even a child can grasp. You can teach a 5-year-old, even a younger child actually, like easily a 3-year-old child generally can understand some fundamental principles associated with that big principle of truth, right? That very easy to understand. Now, how many of you are actually doing it every day? So let's look at honesty. Are you honest with yourself every day? Are you honest with every person you interact with every day? Are you honest about all of your activities and how they damage the world around you every day? Right? Just that one thing could be done. And an example of that is, if I'm honest with myself about destroying the environment, I would know that cutting down trees continually is a bad thing for the environment. Therefore, anything related to cutting down trees, such as my use of paper, is not good for the environment either. So therefore, every time I go to the dunny and I wipe my bum with a toilet paper, I've broken the principle. Right? And I've broken the principle of truth in the sense of not being honest with myself, that it's actually damaging something. Right? But it's a lot better to use a renewable resource than something that's not as renewable. Trees take, overseas some of the ones might take 30 or 40 years to grow. Here in Australia it takes a lot longer because we generally have, harder soil and harsher, less rainfall and so forth. And so it takes even longer for many trees to grow here. But overseas sometimes it's 30, 40 years. But water, rain, every year at least, or often much sooner, like overseas, it pretty much was raining everywhere we went at some point, and so it's sort of like a more renewable resource in that regard than the tree itself is, because it takes so many years. It's logical sense. If I'm truthful with myself, I would face that and I would say, I've got to change my behaviour, no matter what I think about how good toilet paper is. I've got to change my behaviour. Right?
So you take the action, change the behaviour, and then
And some emotions will come.
automatically the feelings will just come out, won't they?
Some will, yes. Some will, yes. Automatically the feelings will start popping up. So, and you'll be able to address them one way or another. You'll be able to, because you're adhering to the principle, you will place an importance on addressing the emotion rather than living in it. You will also place an importance on changing your behaviour rather than living in it. Right? You won't choose to keep doing the same thing because you want to adhere to the principle. You're developing a desire, which is a soul-based emotional drive, a motivation to do something different. Right? Now, the average person doesn't do that with regard to truth. What they do is they look at cause and effect, and they say, yes, I can see this thing that I'm doing is bringing this effect. Right? And then what do they do with that? For the most part, they just dismiss it out of their mind and feelings completely and continue to do the very thing that's causing those effects. If they want the thing. Right? If they're desperate for the thing they want, that's what they do. And so fundamentally they're breaking a principle of truth, which is be honest with yourself. You're far better off going, and this is the point of honesty, far better off going, I have chosen to sin because I like it, than it is to go, oh, I don't understand why I sin. Do you follow?
Yeah.
And recently in my discussions with you, you keep saying, I don't understand why I've chosen to sin. I don't really understand my sin. And I'm going, but you've chosen it. You must know why you're doing it because you've chosen it. And you're going, no, I don't understand. It's all like, mystery to me. And I'm going, well, if it's a mystery to you, it's because you don't want to know the truth. So you're breaking the fundamental principle of truth, and that is honesty with self. The very worst person you can be dishonest with is yourself, because there's no capacity to change when you're dishonest with yourself. Right? You can't change anything if you're dishonest with yourself. So that's the fundamental principle of truth. When it comes to acting it in day-to-day life, the average person resists it to as much as they're possibly able, generally. Right? And so there's cause and effect happening all the way through our lives as well as the lives of everyone else. And the average person doesn't even see cause and effect with somebody else's life, let alone their own. Right? And it's harder to see it in your own because your addictions are involved, but it should be easier to see it in other people's lives because your own addictions might not be as well as involved, but still the average person is going, I don't understand why that happened to that person But if you can see the principles they're breaking, you would see straight away why such things are happening. Yeah. So you've got to get honest with yourself, Nikki. You want your sin, and you don't want to know the principle, right?
This is the truth principle, you specifically, or you mean all of them?
All of them.
Yeah.
At this stage, Nikki doesn't want to know.
The love
All of them.
principle, the truth principle.
You think of why you've avoided. And one of the reasons you said to me that you came to Australia from England was that it was because you wanted to participate more with divine truth and God's way and everything. And then you look at how much you've actually been doing it, and then look at why. Why don't you? It's because none of your addictions get met when you're doing it. Right? And so what have you chosen to do under those circumstances? You've chosen to have nothing to do with divine truth or God's way almost. The entire time you've been here, I mean day-to-day interactions, nothing to do with it. And why do you reckon you've chosen that? Can you see it's quite obvious?
Mm.
If the place where you're not going to get your addictions met is where you need to be, and you've chosen not to be at that place, why do you reckon you have chosen not to be there?
Yeah, because I don't want to feel.
Well, you feel you feel your emotions are more important than principles.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
And the average person we met when we were travelling just recently feels exactly the same. The average person we meet in our whole world feels exactly the same. That if I've got to feel a hard emotion, then I don't want to have to live by a principle. I just don't want to do it because the emotions are too hard. That's what the average person feels. So what we see you doing is distancing yourself from the very path that could help you become happy, fundamentally because you don't want to follow the principle. Make sense? And you're not being honest with yourself about it, because every time you come to a group like this, you ask similar questions, and I always say this is the answer, which is an answer you don't want to hear, and I understand you don't want to hear it, but at the end of the day, it is
That's the truth of
the
it.
truth.
Yeah.
You are the determining factor in your life. No one else. You are. And of course you can involve God in your life through desire, but if you want to adhere to your sin and not to the principle, then how can you involve God in that? Like God's not going to respond to that. And this is why many people who hear divine truth don't actually receive God's love, because they're desperate for their sin, their addiction to continue, and they don't understand the principles they're breaking, and therefore the personality. Every time you break a principle, you are fundamentally saying to God, I don't like your personality. That's really what you're saying. So you're saying on one hand, I don't like your personality, but give me love. Sort of, can you see? It's sort of like, well,
It's not going to happen, is
what
it?
does God do with that? Like, what would you do with that if somebody came along and says, Nikki, I don't like anything about you, but love me? Wouldn't you say, well, why do you want my love if you don't like anything about me? Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
Why would, Mary doesn't like anything about me at all, but still wants me to love her. Can you see it's sort of like, well, why would she want me to love her if she doesn't like me at all? Like, what's the point of that? And every time we are not adhering to a principle, we're fundamentally saying to God, I don't like your nature. I don't like your personality. I don't like what you like, is really what we're saying. Because the laws are what God likes. I mean, God's laws are what God likes. And we're fundamentally in a disagreement under those circumstances, right? Now, if we're in a fundamental disagreement with God, we don't like God's personality, and then on top of that, we're now asking for God's love. Can you see, well, under that circumstance, how could we ever receive the love when the love is a part of God's personality? which we don't like. We don't like the way God loves. Right? Because the aspect of truth is an aspect of love, the aspect of humility, aspect of love, aspect of faith, aspect of love. We're fundamentally saying to God, I don't like the way you love, but love me anyway.
Well, we're really saying love me in the way that I
want to be loved. Is
what
really
my definition.
Is really what we're saying.
And at some point in your future, Nikki, you look back on this period of your life and you'll think, God parented me so well through this period because I was demanding this and I wanted that
period.
and I was so cranky and I thought it was so hard and God was steadfast with me. God didn't move his principles. God was like, Nikki, when you're ready, here I am.
Yep.
Here's the truth. But you're not there yet. And God hasn't given up on you, hasn't backed away,
no.
but just not meeting your demands. Yep. And you come to really be grateful for that in the future.
Yeah.
I feel bad about it, like, because I know I'm doing it. And then when you say that, I'm like,
you mean your addictions, you know you're doing them? Or?
Yeah, and not
But you're
like
not.
turning up because I know I'm not going to get my addictions met, and it's like I'm choosing not to go because I just don't want to.
But you're not seeing how your addictions harm you or others. Right? You think your addictions are good, and so the average person on earth, Nikki, is in an argument with God about their addictions. Really, they're saying like, I want my addictions. Can't you just love me anyway? Right? Can't you just love me even though I want my addictions? Can't you just,
Can't you see this addiction as rational and
Yeah,
good
like-
and legitimate and worthy?
righteous?
Yeah.
So we're in an argument with God fundamentally, and how long you keep up that argument, it's a very tiring argument because at the end of the day, God's not listening to your arguments. So you're basically talking to thin air when you argue, and so it's tiring. You end up expending all this energy and all this force and all this momentum in your life arguing about something that God's never going to change anyway.
I'm so tired about it. I am like, I'm tired, but I just don't want to give it up. Like,
Well, then you're not tired enough.
This is what I mean. God's like, well, Nikki, you still got more energy for this, okay?
Keep on going.
But my law is going to mean you're going to be exhausted at some point.
I've seen people in the hells of the spirit world kicking and screaming, like literally screaming, in pain and agony, and still not wanting to give up the fight. So, what causes a person to give up the fight? Well, that's an internal thing, isn't it? There's nothing anybody else is going to be able to do anything for you with that. You're going to have to work through that yourself as to why you don't want to give up the fight.
And come to want to be educated by God and not keep your own law.
Yeah.
Not keep your own, I'm king, I'm the lawmaker. When you want to start to be educated by God, then you won't want to fight as much.
Yeah. But I understand the problem. It's tricky. It's tricky to get from that state where you want to have a fight and tantrum all the time, and and adults in tantrums last a lot longer than children in tantrums. The average 3-year-old tantrum, you're lucky if it lasts 20 minutes. I have been with one 3-year-old where it lasted about 2.5 hours, and that was about the max. And he was a pretty spoilt kid. That's why it lasted 2.5 hours. But even after the 2.5 hours, he gave up the tantrum. But an adult, I've seen adults stay in tantrums for thousands of years. Just depends, doesn't it, on the choice that you're going to make at the end.
The other issue you face, Nick, is you think that this problem is unique to you whenever you talk about it, but
But it's not.
you mean like the sin and
The
just like
situation
the
you're
whole
in.
principle,
The
yeah.
situation you're in, you often
Yeah.
like, oh, it's very hard for me, and this is a very...
God, understand how bad it is for me.
Yes.
And God's saying, it's not going to be bad for you accepting one of my principles. And you're going, yes, it is. It's going to be terrible.
It's almost like just a big trauma, like.
Why is it a big trauma though, Nikki? Well, let's say the trauma of, why is accepting truth, like transparency, openness, honesty, why is that such a trauma? They're all beautiful things.
Yeah.
So why is it a trauma? It's because you don't want the beautiful things, right? Has to be. Because there's no other reason why it would be a trauma. Time to hand the microphone on it. Now you're in your personal thing and we need to let you be. Jade, you can get the other mic on that side.
I was just wondering if I could get an example of an addiction and how it's, like what like you said it can affect all principles.
Yep.
Like, yeah, just wondering if there's like an example of an addiction and what principles it's.
Right, let's look at your addiction with women with sex. Right, okay. So, what's the addiction? Can you feel that you understand your own addiction?
Partly.
Okay, so
Like
what
a
do you understand?
desperation for
Sexual attention
sexual attention
and approval.
good feelings from women.
Yeah, okay, so that's the addiction, and you're desperate for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you'll, yeah, go.
So-
Well, you're willing to do a lot of things to get that, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're willing to disregard a lot of law,
Yeah. So
human and
Yeah.
okay, so let's look at the laws you're willing to disregard, the principles you're willing to disregard. So when you've got the opportunity to tell the truth, but you know the truth will result in a woman feeling that you're, not a nice guy, what do?
Don't say anything.
Don't say anything. So that's not transparency, so you've broken the law of truth, the principle of truth.
Yep.
Okay, so there's got to be lots of laws you're breaking there, because almost every law of the universe is based on truth. So lots of laws, right, broken there.
Yep.
Okay, what else do? You try to force your sort of self on it, don't you?
Yep.
Like force them. How do you do that? Like there's a number of methods you use. What are the methods? Want some help with it?
One is putting myself in a situation where, like, a woman is with me.
Yeah.
Like, where she might not have wanted to,
Yeah, so you try to force yourself upon her, even though you know she's not really interested.
like with money for like paying for in the past things I've done, and
So what have you done there?
like going for massages and something I'm still engaging in. It's like in a situation that should be just very down the line, nothing sexual stuff going on, but
Yeah.
I'm willing to have those feelings happening in that situation.
Yeah, so you're trying to create a circumstance where you do get sexual feelings from somebody.
Yeah.
and you almost impose your sexual feelings
Yeah.
onto the person who's just trying to give you a massage.
Yes.
Yeah. So what laws do you break there? Do you know?
Free will.
Okay, so you're breaking their free will, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because you're not really giving them a choice. You're trying to force them into a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. To give you sexual feelings.
Yeah.
Whether that's sexual feelings or actual sexual behaviour.
Yeah.
You're trying to force that. Yes.
Yeah.
What else? So free will, big issue.
Yeah.
And free will is about love, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's one of God's most loving gifts that He gave all of His children. So it's breaking the principle of love.
Yeah.
How are you breaking other principles of love? What are other principles of love, such as? What's
not
love?
feeling what's coming up for me. Like just avoiding my own.
So you're not being humble, you're
Yeah.
engaging in something else to try
Yeah,
and avoid.
yeah,
that's
Yeah.
more to do with humility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about if we go back to love?
Let's stay on love for a bit. What is love? Is love a gift or a
Entitlement.
entitlement?
Gifts.
A gift. So every time you feel entitled for something, you're not understanding love at all.
Yeah.
Right? So in this case, you're feeling entitled for sexual engagement.
Yep.
So you're not giving the woman the opportunity to love you at all.
Yeah.
Right? And you're certainly not loving them because you feel entitled.
Yeah.
If they did give you something under those circumstances, you would have felt entitled to it anyway.
Mm.
So you wouldn't even see it as a gift.
Yeah.
Right? So breaking some very big principles of love there.
Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense?
Yeah.
Well, so let's go to humility like you did before.
Yep.
So you not wanting to feel some, what do you feel when you don't get sexual feelings from a woman?
Just
Like gutted, right?
almost like I just can't cope with life. It's
Yeah, like you feel angry. Angry is
Yeah.
the very first feeling you have, isn't it?
mm.
Why? So almost suicidal angry.
I've been I've always felt I'm not suicidal, but I'm wondering how, if I keep going in this way,
Yep.
yeah, like that could be, I don't know.
And also, you could easily get violent with a woman too under those
Mm.
circumstances, couldn't you?
Mm.
So not good in
Mm.
that regard. So what's that? Not being humble to what feelings? In other words, not being prepared to feel your feelings no matter what they are and however hard they are to feel.
Mm.
So what are the feelings that are hard to feel when you're in this state where you're demanding sexual activity and you don't get any? What are the feelings that are hard to feel? Can you recognise them?
Kind of like a self-disgust type.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Pretty deep. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you're
Okay.
quite worried about going to the feelings, which is why you're often reverting to anger to try and feel powerful over them.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you see the difficulty there is not being prepared to feel how bad you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So you feel bad about yourself and you're looking for women to make you feel better about yourself. Right? Because you don't want to go through the feelings you have about how bad you feel about yourself.
Yep.
Make sense? So that is an aspect of humility, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Being prepared to feel how bad you feel about yourself. It's also an aspect of truth. Fundamentally seeing that it's not how the women feel about you that matters. What's mattering here is how you feel about you. You feel bad about you for some reason that you haven't really at this stage identified because you haven't let yourself feel it yet. That makes sense? You're doing everything you can to avoid the feeling, and that's why you haven't identified the reason for the feeling. But
I can't sit in it long enough. Like that just seems to what happened. I just need the distraction. Like so.
yeah, see what you just did? And this is a common thing. You said, I can't and I need. I can't is really saying, this is not me. This is something out of my control. It's out of my, when I say I can't do it, I can't stay there. I can't, get it. I can't understand it. This is saying to yourself, and these are actually false beliefs, right? That you're saying to yourself, because you can. God designed you to. God designed your soul to cope with any emotion. You can do it. You can feel these feelings, and you can handle them. Right? There's so many people in the spirit world that I know who started out with the same feelings you now have, and they all handled them. Every one of them handled them, and they felt bad, but they handled them. Right? Because God designed them to handle them. Because God designed the soul that you can handle your own feelings. Right? So whenever you say, I can't, you're fundamentally breaking another principle which says God designed you to. You're the highest of God's creations. You can handle your feelings. You're the highest of God's creations. In fact, you're the only one of God's creations that God designed to have feelings in terms of emotions that that the person themselves understand. In other words, self-realized emotions. God designed you so that you have them.
So that's another principle, this principle of self-responsibility. God is drawing you towards this state of self-responsibility,
Yep.
and at the moment you're breaking that principle. You're saying, I can't, it's not my responsibility.
Now, just for a moment, let's say that we just listed 4 principles, right, in this discussion with you. Just 4. Let's say Jada actually loved those principles. So at the moment, Jada's going, those principles don't matter as much as my emotions do. In other words,
Emotion.
emotions, principles. That's what you're saying internally.
Yeah.
Now, while your emotions are that high and the principles are this low, when you're faced with a situation, what's going to happen? Your
Do what my
emotions.
emotions say.
Yeah, you're going to do exactly what your emotions demand, aren't you?
Yep.
And you're not going to feel them, but you're just going to do exactly what they demand. And principles be damned is going to be the attitude, isn't it?
Yep.
The emotional attitude inside of oneself would be, who cares about the principles? My emotions are involved. I'll do the principles when my emotions are not involved. But if my emotions are involved, now it's too hard to do the principles anymore. That's the fundamental decision that's being made. So while I'm making that decision that my emotions are more important than the principles, I'm going to sin, guaranteed. There is no way that I can't sin under those circumstances, because the principles don't matter to me and the emotions do. And whatever unhealed emotions I have and whatever painful emotions I feel, they are going to dominate my choices. They're going to dominate my decisions, my actions, everything. Yeah? So here I am. I've got my emotions are in play, and I'm saying those emotions, I've got to save them. In fact, what I'm really saying is I've got to leave them inside of me. I've got to nurture them and save them. I've got to, nurse them, is really what I'm saying. I've got to nurse them, and that's more important to me than any principle. Now, can you see that if your emotions are that intense, the only way that anything's going to change in your life is for the principles to get even more intense? Can you see that?
Yep.
Like, if your emotions are very strong and very powerful on a certain matter, which by the way, on most of our addictions they are, the only way that I'm going to make sure that those emotions are felt is by the principles being even stronger. Because if my principles are not stronger than the emotion, then I'm just going to do what the emotion dictates. If the principles are stronger than the emotion, then I'll do what the principle dictates.
And start to feel
And
those
just build my
emotions.
emotions.
So the emotional intensity will dissipate. So even if you just love one principle, Jad, really love it, grow this interest in it, grow this love in it, it's going to highlight to you the sin. And if you honour the principle instead of your addiction, you will start to feel the emotions that are driving the addiction, which lowers the intensity of the addiction. It helps you grow more interest in the other principles as well. It's like it's a process that supports you once you start to engage it. It supports you continued growth. But like when we're fighting for the addiction, sort of like what we were saying with Nikki, when we're really honouring it and honouring the emotion, the principles don't even have a chance. We can't start the love affair with the principle, if you like. But once we do, this process becomes, you start to grow in the other way.
So I think there's something more than Mary just said though, and that is, how do you love anything? What do you do to sort of fall in love with the thing?
Learn about it, and get to know it.
You get to know it, you spend time with it, you learn about it. So let's say I want to love Mary, and my desire is to love Mary, and let's say at the beginning I don't really know her well, so to know her, I would find out about her, find out about how she feels and how she thinks, and what principles she lives by, and what her personality is, and what her nature is, and I'd find all that information out with her. So let's treat truth. Let's say we want to develop a love affair with truth, right? Because really, this is what it means to have the principle in my heart, is to love it with my whole heart. And so really sort of have a love affair with that principle. Does that make sense to you? So how do I develop a love affair with a principle? Well, obviously I've got to learn more about it. I've got to understand it more, study it more.
It's like
Reflect.
it feels like building a friendship first
Mm.
before it can become a love affair. At the moment, you're like enemies.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to know about you.
But also, if you look at day-to-day activities and day-to-day life, how much time do you spend understanding the principle?
Seeking that out.
Like developing an interest in the principle, discovering what it means. What does it mean? What are the aspects of that principle? How would that principle play out in your life if you really loved it? Like, you'd study it. You see what I'm saying? And you'd come to understand it better. But at some point you're going to also need some faith in it as well, right? As to why does it work? Well, why does truth work? Like in a relationship, why does truth work? Well, when one person lies and the other person is the recipient of the lie, then there's no longer really a relationship anymore. That's why truth in a relationship works better than lies in a relationship, right? But there's many other reasons why. So study the reasons. Like, learn about them, spend some time. But see, for most of us on earth, we spend most of our time sort of eking out an existence, pleasing ourselves or others, and we spend very little time coming to understand a principle. We don't study them. You imagine if school life began 5 years of age, and the very first principle taught was year 5, what's that, grade 1, love. We have a year learning about love. The principle of love, like all the aspects of love, what it means to love people. And imagine by the time you were 6, you might, by that stage, really enjoy love, mightn't you?
Yeah.
Right? But if you don't understand it, and you don't understand how it works and the laws that govern how it flows and all those kind of things, which are all established fact in God's universe, but which most people on earth are never taught. If you don't understand those things, can you see, you can grow up to be 50 and still not understand love at all. You know, what's that song? How did it song go? Still don't understand love at all. What's that?
Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Joni Mitchell, yeah. Both sides now, from give and take, but still somehow. You know, why is a person who, well, I don't know what age she was when she was singing that song, and whoever wrote it for her, she might have written it herself, I don't know, but, and why are they even thinking that way? It's because they've never been educated in love their entire life. But it's also because the average person doesn't spend any time educating themselves. They just don't.
Seeking it out.
They don't seek an education in the principles. They seek an education like materially. They seek an education like with engineering or with science or arts or whatever, but they don't seek an education with principles. But the biggest thing in the universe is the principle. Right? So that's the thing that we should all be seeking an education of first. Right? But hardly anybody on earth thinks that way. And nobody in the education system obviously thinks that way because there's no education provided with regard to these principles, right? You need to do this for yourself.
Yeah.
You need to start providing for yourself your own education of what that principle means. You follow?
Yeah.
Now, if you do that...
But why I asked the question, you were saying addictions affecting all the principles, and I'm thinking, like I still know them, but not really. Yeah, I was really struggling to make the connection of like, what am I really breaking?
Yeah, like this is the thing we find. We've been talking to groups of people now for like 2004 I started talking to groups of people. 20 years, isn't it? About these principles, right? What I find generally is that the average person spends no time in their life studying them at all. They already presume they know them without spending any time studying them. So when they hear the term love, everybody thinks they know what you're talking about. But we have spent no time understanding it. So how do we actually know it? Right? It's the same with the principle of truth. But when we say truth, the average person goes, oh, I get what truth is. But if you've spent no time understanding all of its sub-aspects and all of its the principles associated with it, how do you know? Can you see? The trouble with the education we have on earth is we get usually a dictionary by the time we're 6 or 7 right at school, and somebody says, look up the word truth, this is what it means, they're done. Right? But like, as I said, you could study truth for a year and not know much about it. Right, really. And particularly study it from an emotional perspective in terms of where you study it and try to put that particular thing into practice. So what I'm saying as part of the study is that you study an aspect of truth, and then the very next day, you from then on do that thing and see what happens. So now you're not just studying it, but you're now applying it. It's like having an engineering degree, but you're also doing the engineering while you had the degree. You understand? It's like having a teaching degree, but you're actually teaching while you're doing your degree. So when you learn about truth, for example, well, every time you learn a new aspect of truth, the next day you make some positive decisions in your life to live in harmony with that very thing and just see what happens. What things occur, right? You'll find in some places you might even start measuring and go, wow, there's these positive things that happen because I did that. And then other situations where people don't like you saying the truth, you go, wow, that was pretty negative. Like, wow, why did that happen? Like, they were so angry with me before. They were happy with me lying to them. And now that I'm telling them the truth, they're not happy with me anymore. That's what the average politician feels, right? And so you start working out, people don't like truth as much as they think they do either, and you start working that out as well. You learn more about human nature as well as about the principle. In terms of, and when I say human nature, human sin, as you learn about the principle. The beauty of doing this is you're educating yourself. By the way, God feels you are responsible to educate yourself. Right? That's what it means to be self-responsible, to educate yourself. So you're educating yourself about a principle, then you're acting upon your own education and performing experiments. Doesn't this sound more like a uni degree now, doesn't it? Which is really what it is, isn't it? But a university degree in what love is, or a university degree in what truth is, right? So what you do is you learn about the principle. That's, you could say, the theory. And then what you do is you create some experiments. That's your practicals, right? And then you measure the results of the experiments to work out what happened, right? And that develops your faith.
And through the experiments, you come to feel what the principle feels like. Not you feel what truth feels like. Feel, and you come
and
to
also feel how hard it is to do it in an environment where nobody else wants to.
Yeah, but it's no longer an idea. Now there's an experience attached, and if you're humble in that process, you also start to learn more about the principle without even having to seek outside of yourself. You're like, this is leading me to a new experiment. This truthfulness. Am I really truthful if I just say the truth, but I'm not
feeling it?
You know, that doesn't feel like truth. You know, but that will come to you through this engagement of the experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you treat if the principles are important to you, you will investigate them, plan your life around developing them. You'll create experiments to try them out. You'll do all of that as a natural part of the process of learning, right? As long as you desire to understand the principle. But if you don't want to understand it at all, then of course you're not going to do any of those things. And really, you could say doing all of those things is an expression of your sincerity about your interest in the principle. Can you see, if I'm not sincere about understanding the principle, I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm just going to walk my way through life, listening to terms and using the terminology, whatever, with my mouth, but at the end of the day, none of it is affecting my life at all because I have not developed a desire to really love and come to understand and get to know the principle. So that's what I would suggest you do, Jack. Yeah. So with regard to this, see what you're doing at the moment is you're focusing on one particular sin, the treatment of women. You could say the particular sins involving the treatment of women, but you're not focusing on the principles. Right? Overseas, we had a discussion, I think it was with Perry, wasn't it? In the first group in England, it was, in Linton.
On the second day.
Yeah, but he started telling me about his same problem, the problem he had with how he treats women. And I constantly said to him, I don't want to hear about that problem, I want to hear about the principles. But and eventually we got down to having a discussion about some of the principles involved and what it means to focus on the principle rather than the problem. You follow?
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're focusing on the problem without seeing the problem is based upon the fact that you're breaking principles.
Mm.
So if you focused on the principles, then you'd solve many problems. Right?
Is the problem not causing me to also not live by the principle?
No.
No.
And this is what I was saying to Perry. He was saying to me, the reason why I don't want to know the principles is because of this problem. I go, no, that's not true at all. A person can have many, many problems, but have a desire for a principle and overcome every problem. But if you try to do the opposite, you'll never resolve anything. Right? So yes, this whole concept that people say, oh, they use the excuse, which is the one that you just used, which is, but I have this problem and that stops me from living by the principles. No, it doesn't. What stops you from living by the principles is the problem is bigger than the principle. Do you understand? You're putting your addiction above the principle.
Yeah.
The principle should be up here, and you're putting your addiction up here, and the principle down here.
Yeah.
That's why you're dominated by the addiction. You understand? If the principle was here, up high, and your addiction was down here, low, then you could see you wouldn't allow the addiction to dominate the principle. The principle would dominate the addiction. In other words, instead of acting upon your addiction, you would choose to feel rather than act upon your addiction. In other words, you choose to get to that grief that you just had before rather than act upon the addiction to avoid it. If you loved the principle. So the problem isn't the problems you face. The problem is the lack of love for the principles. Yeah?
Yeah.
You're kind of engrossed in the problem rather than interested and becoming engrossed in the principle.
Yeah. That's not like this.
You might be having to.
Yeah, so as we were talking about with Jad just earlier, can you see the importance of the principle over the addiction? Like, I think when you look at it, studying the principle and understanding the principle and really spending some time, firstly coming to understand it yourself, and then secondly trying or attempting to put the principle into practice in your day-to-day life, what you will find as a guarantee is that emotions will come up and you just need to feel them. And that will happen very, very naturally. You don't have to make that happen. So a lot of people have a focus of, I just need to feel my emotion and then I'll live by the principle. No, you won't. What you need to do is have the principle as a higher priority in your life than the emotion, and then you'll feel whatever emotions you need to feel to uphold the principle.
And you'll actually feel the emotions that you need to let go of in order to uphold the principle, because a lot of times when you focus on your emotion, you just feel your tantrum, you just feel it's not fair, you feel it's hard, you feel you're being hard done, whatever is preferable for you to feel.
Yeah.
And you're not really measuring your feelings against God's truth. The principle automatically creates that differential where you can measure that difference.
Yeah.
Matt?
I just wanted to ask, is there principles that apply to spirits that don't apply
on Earth.
No.
They're all the same in the universe.
Yes.
That's nice.
That's the good beauty of them, is they have the principle of equality built into all of them. So yes, there's nothing that applies to spirits that doesn't apply to you, and there's nothing that applies to you that doesn't apply to spirits.
I thought that might be the case, but I'll get that clarified.
Yeah. And a lot of people hope that when they pass into the spirit world, that there'll be a different set of principles. And there isn't. Yeah. So, you know, if you think about it, that makes a lot of logical sense. God's not going to change his laws just for the sake of where you are in the universe.
And we have you here on Earth helping, and Mary helping us to understand the principles.
You have a lot more than that. Yeah.
So for
You firstly have the conscience, which is the primary mechanism by which you can understand any principle. So that's, you have God.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Everybody has God all
Everybody
of the
has God
time.
all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's number
it doesn't
one.
always feel like that though, you know.
Well, you do, whether you feel
Yeah.
like that or not. It's
Okay.
immaterial. Again, it's just one of your feelings. Feel it. But it's true. You have God, and God, you know, God is the person that can help you the most with your principles. He's the one who knows them the best. So you have, every one of you have God. Every one of you have a spirit, a friend or guide who's trying to help you with at least one principle. And on top of that, you have people on earth who understand some principles, and they're trying to help you as well. You've also got the law of attraction and the law of cause and effect trying to help you deal with your principles. You've also got the laws that of compensation, which are there to help see when you're breaking the principles. So there's so many helps you have. So the average person goes, oh, but there's not, you know, they're so hard to understand and they're so hard to find out about. No, they're not. Not at all. They are one of the easiest things to find out about in your entire life.
You are putting in a concerted effort right now not to understand them.
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone who
I-
doesn't
I
understand
feel
them.
like there's these moments when I hear you say, oh, of course.
Yeah. But the average person is putting in a concerted effort because the addiction demands a concerted effort to fight the principle. So the reason why most people don't understand the principles is not because they're not available, and not because there isn't help to receive them, and not help to understand them, because all of those things are provided. The issue is how much you want to know about them. And the average person on earth doesn't want to know anything about them.
Do you have like I was thinking this before, is there like a top 5 playlist of let's work on these principles first for educating us?
already
They've been mentioned a number of times.
Okay.
Love, friend,
Yes, I wrote those
Truth.
down.
faith,
Yes,
humility,
yes.
action.
Action. Yeah. Okay. So they
Top
are
five.
the top 5. I just want to make sure that hadn't changed.
No,
Thank
that
you,
will
guys.
change. I've been teaching them for 20 years, ever since you've heard me teach. And 2,000 years that we've been teaching them. They haven't changed. And they're not going to change.
I actually felt almost a sense of relief when Mary was talking to Nikki before about saying God's immovable on these things.
Yeah.
It's nice.
But I think the point Mary was trying to make to Nikki is that he will come to understand at some point in the future how loving God has been by not
By not
compromising, by not moving.
Thanks.
So even when you're putting in a concerted effort not to understand the principles, God is still educating you by not moving.
Yeah. Most people don't understand that fundamentally when you're engaging your addictions, you're in a war with God, like a battle. Right? And the biggest battle you're going to have is not with God, but with your own sin. But most people are in a battle with God and they're not battling their own sin at all. And that's the issue that we face. I'm going to come down further.
When is it that we prefer to battle God, or you talk about how we're in a battle with God, but then we're also the hardest one's going to be the battle for our own sin, in the battle with our own sin.
Yep, to get rid of it. Yep.
Yeah, but are we mistaking? It doesn't seem like most people realise that we're in a battle with God, and is that just sort of like an excuse because we prefer it?
Most people think, I want what I want,
Yeah.
not what God wants.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know better than God.
Yeah.
God should come to my
I
party.
am God. Most people think I am God.
I know what's happening here.
Yeah.
So that's the battle.
That's the battle. Yeah. And then you've got to kind of get through that one and then realise actually my battle with my sin is the thing. So it's almost
The
accepting.
battle with your
God's
sin is the
principles.
important thing, isn't it? Because
It
you
is.
get rid of your sin, happiness results.
You don't have to get through a battle with God because you're never going to win it. You never
That's
get
right.
through it.
So
You have
it's
to
a
give
use-
up.
so it's a useless
Don't give up.
distraction.
Yeah, it's
Useless
just
distraction.
it's
Yeah.
a tantrum.
It's a
Yeah.
tantrum.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
And one, the other thing was because God made principles first and foremost. That they're the first things God made
Well, when you say God made them, they existed within God.
because they're part of it.
They're a part of God's personality. They existed within Him. The laws He made.
Based on.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
Yes.
God created the laws,
Yeah.
but the principles upon which the laws are built are a part of God's personality.
So does that mean they're part of?
They've existed forever. They've existed eternally.
Okay.
So because they're a part of God's nature.
Okay.
The laws were creations of God,
Yeah.
based upon the principles.
Yeah.
So every law has been created because God wanted to demonstrate the principle through that law.
So God really wants us to know God.
Yeah, well, there's one way we can come to know God, isn't it? By understanding the principles. Yeah.
Yeah.
And have you noticed, El, the more you get to know God, the more you also love the principles, and the more the principles seem logical and almost
Yeah.
instinctual to you.
Yeah.
So much so.
Yeah.
So much so.
So that's because the principles are a part of God, and you're just seeking God, and therefore the principles are sort of almost natural to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to think about them too much. And the other thing is, when you've talked a lot about having flawed definitions of love.
Yeah.
Another way to say that would be that's about our principles when we're out of harmony with the principles. Like when
Yeah, you could
define a
say
flawed
that
definition
our
of love.
version of love
Yeah.
has no principles.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, I just want to clarify terminology because thank you.
Because if our version of love had principles, it would be God's version of love.
That's all right.
Mm.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, the important to understand that the principles existed before the laws, and God didn't create the principles; they are a part of God's very nature. Yeah. So there's something to understand about God is that God's very nature within Him is contained these principles. This is why when you are against them, you're against God's very nature. You're against His personality.
And so, say in a home, like when you're in your own home, and
Yep.
then you're God's
The lawmaker
you're the lawmaker.
for the children.
Yeah. You I want to be in harmony with God's principles, like
Yeah.
that'd be the ideal. But while you're getting there, you need to hold on.
Can you see where you're headed?
Mm.
And it's a valid
Like
thing
the
where
principles in, like obviously I've got a nature and a personality, so
Correct.
there's principles inside of me that are already part of
you
me.
need to engage God's
You know,
nature and
engage-
personality,
Yes,
which is engaging God's principles.
yes,
If those principles now are a law written on your own heart,
yes,
they're a part of you now.
yes,
So in your house, they're going to be automatically
that's right.
The law.
the law.
But before then, you've basically got your erroneous
Correct.
principles that
Which
you're
will be
living
the
by,
law.
which is going to be the law. Yeah,
Because all your laws will be based on the principles that are in error.
yeah. And then, so what do you have while you're not connected to God? Like you just in your principle list.
Well, the average person develops a list of internal principles,
Yes.
which are not principled from God's perspective, that they are internal ideas and concepts, beliefs you could say, the average person has. And they then turn from those beliefs, they make laws
Yes, they're
for
not.
their family.
They're not really principles, are they? They're beliefs.
They're
rather
beliefs,
than
yeah.
Principles.
Yeah, they're false
Well,
beliefs often.
They're not God's principles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're
You know,
someone
sometimes
else's.
they are, sometimes they are,
Yeah.
sometimes they aren't. It's just whatever the choice was made by the person at the time.
Yeah.
So you know, let's say one of your children hits the other,
Yeah.
then you're probably going to restrict the child's behaviour under those circumstances.
Yeah.
But when the child abuses the other emotionally,
Yeah.
if you were in harmony with God's principles, you wouldn't allow that either.
I'd restrict them too.
That's right, but you haven't
I
been
haven't
doing that,
do
right?
that, no.
So that indicates that the law God's law is not in your own heart, therefore God's principle is not yet in your own heart about what constitutes abuse.
Correct.
Because abuse is not just physical, it's also sexual and emotional and spiritual abuse can occur as well. So if you understood the law from or your principle, you would see that actually every form of abuse should be opposed,
Yeah.
not just physical abuse.
Yeah.
So you see in the world today, you see oftentimes physical abuse. There's a law that says you're not allowed to do it, and you go to jail, or you're basically it's considered an assault. But you're allowed to emotionally abuse anybody. Like, you know, there's people on the internet emotionally abusing other people all day, every day. That's all they do oftentimes is abuse other people. You know, none of that is considered breaking the law, right? But it is breaking God's law.
Yeah.
See, if the principle was in your heart about abuse, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that a person can do it means that principle is not in their heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where my education needs to continue. It's like, okay, I don't understand this principle yet. Like, I understand the physical abuse part, but
Yeah,
I haven't understand
but not the
emotional
emotional, the
abuse or
sexual, the sexual or the spiritual.
Yeah,
Because the sexual abuse often happens through the engagement of feelings and not action, and yet the average person accepts it, right, under those circumstances. But if there was the law in their heart that said no form of sexual abuse is acceptable, even sexual abuse that's contained in emotion rather than just action, then of course they wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
Right, so you can see that, you know, frequently we internally we sort of have a priority system. If it's happening physically, we talked about this a lot overseas. We talked about when things are happening physically, the average person generally accepts it's happening. But when it's happening sexually, spiritually, or emotionally, the average person doesn't care about it.
Yeah.
Right? Which is actually against the principles, because from God's perspective, the most important things are the spiritual principles. And so if something is happening in abuse of a spiritual principle, such as, let's say, a religion teaching a false belief, which is an abuse of a spiritual principle, then that's worse than abusing somebody sexually or emotionally from God's perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Because the spiritual principle, when abused, will cause like billions of people to do the wrong thing. Literally billions, you know. And this is why people who teach false beliefs have a lot to answer for in the spirit world, because they have been involved in the process of sharing beliefs which then imbibe many, many actions of a sexual, physical and emotional nature which are abusive towards others. So an example of that, if you look at the Bible, it says quite clearly, Book of Corinthians, it says that the wife must be in subjection to her husband, right? So that's what it says. It's a spiritual principle which is not in harmony with equality. Obviously not. Because equality would say wife, husband, same, equal. That's equality, right? And if a wife has to be in subjection to, she's not equal anymore, right? She's not got as equal, say, as the husband. So it's disharmonious. It's a false teaching. Obviously a false teaching, out of harmony with love. Contained within the Bible, out of harmony with love. By the way, the Quran has the same false teaching, out of harmony with love. So out of harmony with love belief, what does it cause? It causes the idea in the minds of men that they are more important than their wives, that they can demand things. In fact, the Book of Corinthians also says that the husband is allowed to ask for his due sexually, right? Which is basically saying that if she doesn't want to, but he wants to, and she's interjecting to him that she should give it, right, sexually, is fundamentally what it's suggesting. Now, out of harmony with love, definitely out of harmony with love, and because it's out of harmony with equality as well, obviously, but it's also abusive. And now, that teaching has been present in the so-called written word for 1700 years, right? How many people do you think it's affected?
Everyone?
Any person who has imbibed this belief system, and you look at the way it's affected them, the men it's affected one way,
Yeah.
which is sort of like, I'm allowed to dominate my wife, I'm allowed to tell her what to do, she needs to listen to me, and if we disagree then I have the final say, and you know, I sort of own her sexually as well, really, is the general encouraged view. And we see this a lot when we go to religious countries, particularly Christian countries. So in the USA, for example, almost every man we met who was in a relationship had this view of his wife, right? The people who came along to our seminars had that view of their wives. The wife actually, in many cases, the wives actually said, "Oh, I can't come next week because my husband doesn't want me to." Right? What? Like, do you want it? Yes.
Yeah.
What? Like, you know, so obviously out of harmony with equality, right?
Yeah.
Therefore out of harmony with love. But that has come from this underlying teaching that's been going on for thousands of years. How many women and men, like men injured in the sense that they believe themselves to be superior,
Yeah.
and then women injured into believing themselves that they have to be in subjection. How many persons' lives has this damaged in the course of history? One teaching,
Yeah.
one cheap teaching damaged huge numbers of people's lives,
Yeah.
right? And we're talking billions of people over that period of time have been damaged by this teaching. So you can see when the principle isn't adhered to and then taught, a false belief taught in its place, it causes devastating results, right? So there's many rapes occurring inside of marriage, right, that are a direct result of these false teachings, right? And if they weren't encouraged, right, through the teaching, you wonder how many of them might stop, right? Particularly if they weren't encouraged from a young age. But unfortunately, they're encouraged from a young age. The boys are treated as if they're superior to the girls and so forth, and dad's superior to mum, so that mirrors that sort of behaviour to the children. So you have all sorts of these very big problems being created from one false belief.
Yeah.
That's in disharmony with the principle.
Yeah. Which is why spiritual.
The spiritual principles are the biggest devastating effect on culture. And of course then you've got the emotional principles and your sexual principles and the physical principles. Of course, they all play a part, but if you start with the spiritual principles, you can iron out a lot of those other principles by starting with the spiritual ones. Yeah? And that's why the principles of love, truth, humility, faith, taking action, these principles are so important to study and develop and understand and develop a desire to do, get to know and do and measure the results of.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Would it be fair to say that as we begin to understand the principles, we would also get to understand our own personality? And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Well, you could say firstly that when you understand the principles, you're starting to get to know God's personality, right? And it is true that some of your personality obviously has been created, all of your personality has been created by God. So therefore you may start to also get to know your own personality. But if you think about it, every addiction you're in masks your personality.
That's why you get to know yourself better.
So because you're awakening to the addictions, awakening to your sins, the less of them that you have, the more of your personality you will come to know.
And enjoy and experience, because you're not being driven by these addictions that continually take you away from the personality God created.
If that makes sense.
Howard?
When you say personality and nature, are they actually the same thing?
Well, often I've been using the terms interchangeably, but the more you come to know God, the more you recognise that personality and nature are not necessarily the same things. Right? And the reason why that is the case is because as you grow emotionally in your capacity to experience emotions, you start to be able to be sensitive enough to feel the differences in nuances that you didn't know before, right? But for the point of our discussion, let's call them the same thing for the moment.
Thanks. So it's just kind of a phrase at this stage. Isn't it?
Yeah, what I love about the principles is that the principles are a part of God's personality. So, and then there's also a part of God's nature as well. Now, when you start studying those two aspects of God, the personality and nature, you start seeing how principles, if they're a part of his personality, so what does it mean for truth to be a part of your personality? What does that mean to you, if I say that?
It's something that I appreciate and seek.
And joy?
Yeah.
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 Anything else that comes to mind?
I feel like a deer.
That's all right. That's all right. Don't have to go into a panic. Yeah.
It just feels just right. Like it feels.
Yeah. Can you see
like-
when we
feels
talk
like the
about
truth.
personality, it's a lot to do with the joy of the person, isn't it?
It might make you spark up, you know, when you see
But-
people start on a certain topic and they get all excited.
Yeah. So
Truth would be like
you
that.
could say passionate. You could say the personality is a part of your passion, isn't it? Like, so God is passionate about truth. Right? And after the more you connect to God, the more you feel that, like that how passionate God is about truth. But it's also part of God's nature. What does that mean? What does that suggest to you when I say that? As different to the personality.
Well, that was my original
Question.
question. Well, I'd say like kind and loving and gracious and all that kind of stuff, but humans could be like that as well, couldn't they?
Well, not to the extent God can be, obviously.
Yeah.
But
But
what's the difference between the nature and the personality? Want to have a stab?
So if truth is part of God's personality, does that make his nature trustworthy? Is that what you...
Well, that is true.
Yeah.
It does make his nature
So
trustworthy.
is that part of the nature of
But
what
when
we're
you
talking
think
about?
about the word nature, what does
What
that
does
suggest?
what
to
does
you?
it feel like? If something's a part of your nature, what's that? How does that feel? Different to personality.
Default.
Yes,
Yes.
You could say
Yes.
that. Default, yes.
Look, if you go
whatever
to
say.
Lorraine,
Yeah.
maybe. Oh, sorry.
It's natural.
It's natural, yes. Obviously, nature, natural. Yes. Jen, you want to? Well, we'll get this go across the back then. Yep.
Oh.
So,
It's inherent in you.
yes, inherent.
Your
Yep.
personality is how you express
Yourself,
what's inside.
correct.
It's like,
Can you feel the difference between that? It's like, one is what's inherent within oneself,
it's like
and
woven
your
into the
personality is
fabric
how
of
you
you.
express what is inherent in oneself.
How you give that life.
It's God's essence.
I wanted to say that it was the core fundamental thing that makes you unique.
Well, that's personality.
Isn't that how you express that uniqueness?
Oh, true, Jen.
So we were
So we're talking about God here, though, Jen.
Oh, I was talking about
People.
people,
Yeah,
nature of people.
yeah, we're talking about God.
We're actually talking about what does
The
it mean
differences.
if you think about God, truth as being a part of God's nature versus
Versus.
how does it feel God's truth being a part of God's personality.
So that raises a question for me, is that if I'm made in God's image,
Yep.
if that's truthful,
What part of you is made in God's image?
the part that makes me unique,
No, let's be more specific. What part of you is made in God's image? There's only one part of you
My-
that's made in God's image.
my capacity to be able to understand,
No?
well,
What
Just
part of
be-
you is made in God's image?
Be scientific about it.
Be scientific about it.
just my soul.
Your soul, yes.
Soul.
Your soul is made in God's image. Not your personality.
But then that then makes it understanding principles. There's like, how do I say it? There must be a conduit or a fundamental thing at the soul level to understand God's principles.
Well, that's how he designed the soul. But he didn't give you the principle that he has. It's a
We've
thing you
got
have
to
to develop.
explore it.
Sorry?
We've got to then explore that.
No, he gave you the ability to explore it as a part of your soul.
And so that's where the gift of free will comes in.
That's right.
And that's amazing. That's just,
Yeah, Nikki?
I got that.
You were going to say?
I was just trying to understand the personality with God and stuff. So you know how like people say, "Oh, that person's gentle-natured,"
Yep.
but then gentle is also part of personality, right?
Well, it depends. See, one is what's inbuilt inside the person. You could call that the nature, and then how they express themselves is their personality, isn't it? Yep. So inbuilt inside of God is this principle of truth. How does he express it? He expresses it with like amazing power and joy and like there's just so much like the way God expresses it with so much passion and desire. And he's very like a lot of comedy in it as well. He expresses it.
A lot of comedy.
Like, yeah, you know, I know many of you don't sort of believe this. You know, it's like when God sees you doing something out of harmony with truth, he often is having a chuckle to himself, right?
Really?
Yeah.
But was he not going, "Nikki, what are you doing? You're hurting these people. Like, you're hurting my other brothers and sisters. My brothers and sisters.
Your brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
His children.
He's God's children, yeah."
Yeah. Well, of course, but he's also going, "Nikki, don't you see like the craziness of it all? It's like, Nikki, don't you see how silly you're being right now? Like, isn't it silly what you're choosing to do? You know, so God has a lot often a lighter perspective than what you have about when you sin. And when I say lighter, it's not that he doesn't disagree with you. He does, and quite often very firmly and strongly. But he also sees that you're in a learning process, and if you could just learn from it, you would benefit. And you know, often God obviously that is not like laughing at people who don't learn from it. But he does smile about the fact that you do the same thing over and over and over and over again, hoping for a different result, and different results not coming. And he's going, "Nikki, I created you better than this. Like I created you, like with the ability to look at what you did then and go, here's the results, and do I want to do it again? No, it's not a great idea. You know, and when you choose it and you go, yes, it is a good idea, after learning that it's not a great idea, then he's going, isn't that pretty silly, Nikki? Like, I think that's pretty silly for you to just keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. Like, and sometimes you do have to, you know, like I feel the same way sometimes when I watch people doing the same thing and I go, look, it's the same result you got last time. Then why didn't you learn from that?
On a guide's like that too, because like I just felt like I would, like a month ago, I was doing something. It's like, oh, Nikki, there you go again. Eat 3 things is certain in life. That's what he said. Eat, sleep, and Nikki doing this thing. And it just came to me, and I was like, yeah. Unfortunately, the moment.
Unfortunately,
yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, God's not got such a harsh view of your sin. He wants you to see that every time you sin, the law is already bringing you the penalty. So God doesn't need to bring you further penalties than the law already brings you. But God does want you to see that every time you sin, you are acting against his principles, and therefore acting against his personality, and therefore also going to have unhappiness as a result.
But when you're in your big drama, like, this is so hard, and oh my God, you've been crying for
Truth
weeks.
is so hard. Why
This,
do I have
I'm never
to do
going
it?
to get it, and I'm just bad, and this is bad, and I hate everyone, and it's all the end of the world. God is like, there you go.
There you go.
Just try to make it all a big thing, but it's just,
Raven
it's
on the
only
bed.
temporary, and you know, it's like a little ant going,
Look,
I was just feeling that's another example of how we can learn about a principle of love, is that that's God's revealing his principle that when we are out of harmony with his laws, that there's that compassion and that lightness and that mercy. And so when we're hard on ourselves,
well, when does mercy happen though, Laura?
mercy.
So we've got to be not. You see, we're not
we're not
saying
saying it's a,
that it's a given thing.
yeah.
Okay. So I'll yeah, because I understand their words.
See, what the average person wants on earth, they want to be able to sin, and they want God to treat them mercifully, even though they've chosen to sin. That's what the average person wants. You're going to find under those circumstances, there's no mercy at all. At all. The law will grind you into submission. The law of compensation will grind you into submission. Because there is a law involving how mercy is used. Mercy comes when you're repentant. That's the only time you're going to receive grace, is when you're repentant, right? When you're not repentant and you're firmly involved in the sin, the law is going to enforce itself upon you until you change and become repentant, right? And this is something that the average person on earth doesn't really get. Even people in religious circles don't get. And this is why when they arrive in the spirit world, they're so shocked. You see, but I thought I was sorry for that. And God's measure of your sorrow is completely different than a person's personal measurement of their own sorrow, right? And so the expectation the average person has of God's mercy, if you expect it, you're not going to receive it. Can you see why? Because mercy is a gift. So if you expect it, it's no longer a gift. If it was given, it can't be given, right? So don't assume that a part of God's compassion is God's mercy just as a given. The mercy comes with, the compassion is always there, but the mercy comes with the law being engaged of repentance.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, because I was feeling that if I'm hard on myself, then that's breaking the principle of love, because love isn't hard on someone, but that's
Well, love's firm for the Lord. So if, like, it depends by how you define hard. And you see, often we use words, and what you think hard is, I might not think hard is. So we need to be more specific with some of our words, perhaps, don't we? So a line in the sand, you cross it, you're going to get the penalty, right? And that line is immovable. It's not going to change for you or anybody else. But because of equality, it can't change for you or anybody else. The line in the sand is drawn, and that's the law. The law establishes that line. As soon as you cross it, there is a penalty. That penalty will continue until another law, a higher one, is engaged, of mercy, which requires your forgiveness. Right? If you are not, your repentance. If you are not repentant, the other law will continue, the line in the sand will continue, and no quarter will be given, right? Until you engage the higher law of repentance, right? So don't confuse God's compassion with God's mercy.
And when we are self-attacking, which sometimes is what we mean when we're hard on ourselves,
Yeah.
like in the little dramatisation I was giving with Nikki, he's not even really being attacking of himself there, he's sort of having a drama. You know,
Yeah.
lots of us
He's
do
in a
that all the
He's in
time.
a tantrum.
We have a big drama, we're trying to make out that it's all too hard for us to deal with.
Yeah.
But it's not actually. But when we are self-attacking, that is also us sort of getting away from God's line. We're saying, oh well, if we're genuinely attacking ourselves, it's usually to distract from the fact that no, there's a choice here for me to make, which is to change, to love, to adhere to a principle.
Yeah.
But I think the better way is just to be harsh or hard or denigrate myself in some way,
Yeah.
rather than deal with that choice.
Self-attack is disingenuous.
It's disingenuous.
Yeah.
It's insincere.
It's insincere.
Yeah.
Right, every time you attack yourself, you're being insincere. Because you don't really want to solve the problem, you just want to attack yourself for having it. Right? So that's insincerity. So the average person who self-attacks, you're being very insincere. Right? The
So the
person who's...
principle of truth rather than love, because you're being insincere with the truth of what's really going on inside.
And also what you really want to deal with.
Yes.
Yeah, you'd rather attack yourself than you would deal with the actual problem. The average person who attacks themselves would prefer to attack themselves than deal with the actual problem in a more proactive, loving manner.
That's the purpose usually of why we do it.
That's right. And we were taught often that from our childhood because that's what our parents wanted us to do. But even so, it's an avoidance of the issue rather than actually the issue. So it's an addiction. It's a sin actually. Self-attack is a sin. For that reason. It's out of harmony with the principle of love.
Yeah.
It's also out of harmony with the principle of truth because you're not being honest with yourself. It's out of harmony with the principle of humility because you don't want to feel the real problem, you want to create another one instead. Self-attack is creating another problem rather than dealing with the real one. So like Mary says, oh, Jesus, you treat women badly. And I go, oh, I'm such a terrible person. I know I treat women bad. Oh, I'm so terrible. I'm so bad and everything. What am I really doing?
You're avoiding actually looking at why you're actually treating women.
Yeah, I'm making it all about me and not about the fact that I've treated women badly. That's what I'm doing, right? And that's disingenuous. That's insincere. That's me actually living out of harmony with the principle of love and the principle of truth, and instead going, oh, now I'm going to do all that. Mary will get off my back and she'll feel sorry for me. That's me trying to manipulate a feeling from Mary that she shouldn't tell me that anymore, even though I want to continue doing it.
Which is actually you continuing treating me badly.
Correct. Correct. Because I'm not taking responsibility for the fact that I do that with women, and then she's going to have to raise the issue again now. And not only that, I'm also wanting her to feel sorry for me because I'm attacking myself so much. Right? That's the reason why I'm doing it, is I want other people to feel sorry for me now, and they'll get off my back. Now that's very insincere. That's not me addressing the real problem. So self-attack, yeah, an addiction, not a real problem. Yeah. Hannah?
Yeah. I want to go back to this nature and personality.
Of God?
Yeah, and of us.
Okay, which one are you interested in most?
Both. I was
Not gonna
wanted to
answer
check. Pardon?
She said both.
Both, you reckon?
Mm.
Yeah, you're more interested in your own personality and nature than God's, is the reason why I said that.
Okay. What
Yeah.
did you say?
You're more interested in your own personality and nature than you are in God's.
Mm.
And this is also something that I see happens with most people. We're more self-involved than we think.
Mm.
And we don't understand the detrimental effects of our own self-involvement. So the more I connect with God and the more I'm able to feel God's personality and nature, the more I'm able to feel God's love for me. And in the process of feeling God's love for me, I will be able to feel more of what God likes in me, and therefore what is a part of my nature and personality.
What God put in me. What
That
God
makes
created.
sense? But if I have the other focus, which is I want to find my personality and nature without God's help, right, now I'm being much more self-absorbed, but also it's highly unlikely that the result is going to occur that I want, because I'm going to be looking for things in me that I may not have, and also trying to discover things in me that I may not be there. Right? God knows what's there, and God knows what God created. You follow? And so it'd be a lot easier for me to discover myself if I'm connected with God first.
You run the risk of, you know, how we were talking about the addiction or the emotion being more important than the principles. It's just a similar issue where you're putting, discovery of myself more important than the principles, not understanding that if I focus on the principles, I'm going to come to see my experience, my personality and nature, because I'll be getting rid of everything inside of me that opposes it and engaging it in a loving way, in harmony with principle.
I wanted to check if I had understood what you said, that the nature is what is how God, my version of the soul that God created, is my nature, and my personality is how I express that, and so it is with everyone.
Yeah.
And God has all of it.
Well, when you say all of it, what do you mean?
I mean, I'm my soul, me.
Does he have all of your sin?
No. All of our natures is. We are all parts of God's nature. He has created the soul.
Well, he can't create anything in you that's not already a part of him. That is
Exactly.
true, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
So that's true. So yes, you have sub aspects, you could say, of God's nature that are a part of your nature. Yes, that is true. But quite often, what I see a lot of people do with that is they are more focused on developing themselves than they are on developing the principles in harmony with God's nature. And the problem with that is you become so self-absorbed and self-focused that you end up generally forgetting God exists at all.
Just wanting God to help you in that process rather than sort of loving God in that process.
Yeah. So the net result of that frequently is that you start believing that your addictions are your nature, right? And that's what I see most people doing on earth. They often list things. Even when I first met Mary, you were often listing things to me about what you felt were your nature, which isn't that just an addiction, right?
It was sin that I valued really in myself is what I was listing.
Yeah.
Thinking it was a good thing about me, but it wasn't really anything to do with my actual nature. It was about me avoiding parts of my nature.
Yeah. When you focus on your relationship with God first, that's why I said seek first God's kingdom, then all these other things, including God's explanation to you about your own personality and nature, will become clear. That's one of the things that's added to you. You understand? When you do the opposite to that and you focus on yourself first, it's highly unlikely you're going to hear much from God in that place. So what I noticed for you, Anna, you altogether both focusing on yourselves a lot, but not focusing on understanding God much. And that's going to cause you all sorts of trouble in the future. Because you start believing that you know God when you don't, but you'll also start believing you know yourself when you haven't received from God any information about yourself. So, that is...
The question that I have is, because it's funny we're talking about this topic about what we're talking about today, but I was just in regards to industry, like painting, for example. Like I've got a painting business, and I noticed years ago that it's completely out of harmony with a lot of last principles in regards to the way people actually price jobs. For example, a painter will come into this house and go, 3,000, and another painter will come in, 4,000, another one will come in, 1,500.
Yeah.
There was no consistency, so I spent 5 years developing a spreadsheet to make it fair for the customer to know where the money's going, how long it takes them to do a good job, how much materials and profits and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the more I dug in, the more I realised how it's unloving to the planet. A lot of the chemicals, a lot of the disposal, and I went through this hours and hours down this rabbit hole trying to make it more harmonious with principles of love.
Yep.
But it's the more I look in, the more it gets harder to
do that.
To do it, yeah, because the societies or people can't pay for that for starters. Like if you want to start becoming that way, it ramps prices up drastically to get the materials, time, disposal, and do it all nicely and safely.
Yeah.
So how do you go through, doing this kind of thing and then still trying to be in harmony with the principles?
In a practical manner.
In a practical way, like in that kind of sense. Cause
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Firstly, can you see what happened with yourself in your own experience? Firstly, you started seeing that there needed to be some consistency in the way that which you were doing something. So that's in harmony, isn't it, with the principle of truth, isn't it? To have consistency.
And equality,
And
really.
equality,
You're trying to have equality.
con-
transparency.
And transparency, so that you could say to one group of people, and the next group of people get the same quality, the same finish, the same engagement, the same price, the same. Do you know what I mean? So that meant that you were bringing your life in that regard, just in that one regard, into more harmony with love and truth and the principles associated with such things, right? So that was good.
And I felt the business became better.
Of course it's going to become better,
Yeah.
because it's in harmony with the law,
Yeah.
more in harmony than it was before.
Yeah.
So it's going to get better as a result,
Mm.
and certainly it's going to get better as a result if you do that, right? But then there's these other aspects of like money, right, which worries you a lot.
Yeah, because I don't want to overcharge a customer.
You see, now you're talking about your fears.
Yeah.
How can you overcharge somebody when it is the price?
Yeah, you can't. Really.
You can't overcharge them, so you're not being unfair with the price,
No.
right? Not that I think you should be doing it for any money at all, by the way. So
Yeah.
we're just talking about your growing awareness of what's going on. So if you look at it initially, there's a growing awareness. Consistency is something that I must do if I love people. So you bring your business more into harmony with being consistent. That's a good thing. And as a result of doing that, you're going to find that the business does better because it's more in harmony with the law. Because it's more in harmony with the law, it's going to have less. The law is trying to attack anything out of harmony with the law, and if yours is more in harmony with the law, then you get less happens as a result, right? You also find it's also in harmony with education, which is also in harmony with the law of love, right? Educating people what's involved. But in the process, you also started to educate yourself.
Yeah.
And in the process of educating yourself, you come to see, wow, there's a lot of chemicals in these things, right? And those chemicals obviously have a cost to the environment, a cost that most of us are prepared to pay, but we don't really understand the cost. You follow? So what's the next thing you do? The next thing you do is you start investigating how do you make it better? Like how do you get rid of these problems? Now, of course, if a person was really passionate, they'd probably develop some kind of a paint, some kind of a surface finish that would be in harmony with love and not have all those chemicals. They'd investigate why those chemicals exist in the paint and whatever, what the purpose of them, because obviously people just don't add chemicals to a paint for no reason. Yeah. They've got to have a reason for doing it, So you have to work out all of those things. Now, that requires a lot more personal effort, doesn't it?
And requires passion in that area, like the chemistry, and I don't think I have the passion in the chemistry as I should probably if I'm pursuing that career,
That's right. So now you're coming to terms with some things inside that are not so loving, in the sense that you want to be able to still earn an income from painting, but on the other hand, you don't really want to know everything about the painting and develop a paint that really works, and it's also in harmony with the principles. And so can you see now what's getting exposed, you could say, is some unprincipled behaviour.
Yeah.
You follow it?
Yeah.
Now, once that behaviour gets exposed, what do you do with it? Right? The average person goes, it's too hard now to be principled. So in other words, what they do is there's a ramping up of the principle, until you hit this point where it feels like it's now too hard to make this transition into the whole principle. I've got it as good as it can get with all of my other problems that I have. Is that,
All the other areas I don't want to live like
Yeah,
principle.
yeah.
I'm
Does that
now
make sense?
limiting
Yeah.
my further progress.
Completely.
yeah, so we go until we get to a point, and then we stop, and then we're saying, and now at this point, what normally kicks in is what we call reasoning. But it's not actually reasoning. What it is justification. Rationalisation is what kicks in. And the rationalisation says, but if I do that extra bit, I'm going to have to go to university to understand this. I'm going to have to, but that's not necessarily true, by the way, because
Because I know other people have probably done that already,
maybe.
and I've researched some products that have way more beautiful ways to treat the planet. So
Correct.
there are products there, but
Correct. So the key is to find them, but that is research is required, time and energy. You're not getting paid while you're doing this research
No.
either. So it means a low income while you're researching and spending more time trying to find out how to do the thing and how to do it better and all that kind of stuff. You're doing all of that kind of thing as well at the same time, right? Now, if you're really focused on the principle, you will do those things. If you're not focused on the principle to that point, you will get to a point where you feel you've done enough, and that's where you'll stop. Make sense?
yes.
Yeah. So the key is to get to the point where you stop,
Where I am right now.
where you are right now, yeah, and then go, what's going to be required of me to take the next step from here, right? Because you can also see, can't you, that the next step from where you are now might result in some major changes in the way painting happens on Earth.
And this is the thing, if you keep living by God's principles in no matter what area it is
Yeah.
on earth, you will become a leader because the
Because nobody else is probably going to do it.
rest of the planet's pretty out of harmony with God's principles. So it requires people being humble in that process as well of leading.
That's true,
If you keep going, you're going to stand out more, you're going to innovate more, you're going to do more different things.
But most people don't want to be the first.
No, because
They don't
lonely.
want to stand
Well, you say that, but I don't know about
Probably
that.
not, yeah. I was just probably saying something, but yeah.
That's a feeling that
It's
happens.
an
I'm just
anti-motion.
talking. But
That's an information that needs to have to deal with. It's, I don't know if it's actually true because there are benefits from being first. There's many benefits of being first about something. And I've experienced many of them with regard to truth, for example. So there's many benefits from being first, but the average person on earth doesn't want to be. Because being first takes the largest amount of effort than anybody else is ever going to do following you. You understand?
Yes, yeah.
Being first is harder in that regard because it takes a larger amount of desire and effort than anybody else following you is going to have to do. Because they'll be able to build on what you discovered.
Yes, that's right.
So therefore they'll have less effort.
And
Is
you
that- is that-
want to help them learn it.
And if you have a loving desire, you'll want to help them as well. So that they'll definitely have less effort, right? So for a lot of people, the reason why they don't want to be first is it does take a lot of effort. A lot of passion, a lot of desire that the majority of people don't have enough of to do that, right? And as a result of that, they're waiting for someone else to come along and put that first effort in, which, by the way, is out of harmony with love.
Self-responsibility, right?
Well, it's out of harmony with love. Like, if I loved you, I wouldn't mind going first.
Yeah, that's right.
You follow me?
Yeah.
But if I don't love you, I want you to go first.
You
So
do
I don't
great.
have to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's an aspect of love where if I love you and I have worked out something and I've found something that you don't know or that you don't even think of, it's in your interest and mine if I go first and find it out and do something about it and discover it and work it all out. That's a loving thing for me to do for you,
Yeah.
as well as for myself, but also for you. See, that's not how the majority of people feel on Earth. How they feel generally is they get to a point where they realise something needs to be discovered. Like, there needs to be a replacement for plastic,
Yes.
doesn't it? Like, the world has a desperate need for a replacement for plastic.
And there's a lot of consensus about that, isn't there?
You all agree, don't you?
Yeah.
How many of you have
Most
done
people-
something about it? Can you see the difference between knowing a problem and then having enough passion and enough desire and enough love for others to want to do something about it?
And the plastic is like 60% of the painting industry has got plastic everywhere. Even
That's
the
right.
paint when it dries, it turns into a plastic.
That's right. That's right.
So it's just, yeah.
That's right. And that, you know, obviously they've for a reason done that because it's quite resilient. And but it means that all this stuff is falling in on us all day while we're living in the home. It's all coming in on us all day. We're feeling it all day. And so we're absorbing it all day. Our bodies are now, I think it's 0.05% plastic.
That's
because
our
of that.
brain.
Our
That's
brain, sorry, is
0.05%.
yeah, 0.005 or something percent plastic now. Everybody's brain. Children are born with plastic in their bloodstream. You know, it's all because of where we're living and how we're living and everything. These are problems we need to solve, but the average person goes that somebody else should solve it first. And that's where our problem is that if we start believing someone else should solve it first, we're now saying, I'm going to wait until some kind person comes along and solves it for me.
And like you're saying, you could just, if I keep going on the trajectory of being more in
Discovery.
And
more loving, more
it'll have to involve some of these plastic issues, right?
Yep.
Because it's going to have to go there.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Correct.
it might change something else, and someone else's passion.
Correct. That's what a lot of people find. They discover one thing and it affects 5 different other things.
Yeah.
That's often what happens, right? That's how it was for me when I discovered truth. It affected everything.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing about God's principles. You know, you live by them and you innovate or you discover or you grow in this one area. The law says it's going to reward multiple things.
Yeah.
That's how it works. It's a great
Yeah.
system, isn't it?
Mm.
Love is so
Yeah.
generous in that way.
Yeah. So the key part of your question is this. How loving is Fab prepared to be
Yeah,
versus how loving does Fab want to be?
yeah. Yeah. Well, I obviously still at this stage still research as I go. So I do want to do something.
So this is good.
So I do have something pushing me to just,
Yep.
I want to do something here.
So this is good.
But my lack of knowledge in the area sort of stops me, and then
So how do you fix that?
I'll keep learning.
Yeah, and also you try to find other people, connect other people who have that knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you can ask God to help you do that with people, find people, meet people, ask people questions like, this is what I do all the time with people. Are you interested in that? Are you interested in this? Many of you know who this is about us, right? Mary and I are like question about your life, finding out about your life for this reason. What do you love? Because there's certain things that we want to discover or whatever or do, and we think, wow, that's something we need to know about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, you know, a person who loves will do these things
Yeah.
and will continue to do them.
And I have found the business get easier and better because now I've got like 4 guys working for me.
Yeah.
And I actually, the way I've laid out my work schedule has made it so easy for them to do their job properly that everyone's happy at work. And so I know that there's a trajectory upwards going in that area, but you're right, I'm not. But maybe it's just a fear that I have.
There's fears that are going to come up there.
Yeah.
You've got some fear of money that needs to be addressed. You've got some fear that, how much time do I do in research versus how much time do I actually get something done? And, you know, in terms of that, there's that.
How much do I really love painting?
Yeah.
These things.
Yeah, these kind of things. Fear about things getting too big as well.
Yeah.
Succeeding, standing out.
All these kind of fears.
Facing opposition.
Yeah.
Facing.
What happens when people attack you? Because a lot of times when you're first, people attack you.
That's right, yeah.
Like, it's funny because people attack you for hundreds of years and then after that they agree with you and they follow you anyway. It's sort of, that's how it works. But it's like, you know, there's many people who murdered me in the 1st century who followed me afterwards. So it's sort of like, you know, people don't realise that often what they're attacking is They have really no knowledge of what they're attacking. So it's important not to put too much store in their attack. You know, like who cares sort of thing is the attitude that you almost need to have. In a sense, you deal with it. It's just emotions. You deal with your emotions about being attacked, and then once you work through that, then you'll be prepared to be attacked and get some things done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And later on, those
also like, oh, do I have enough time to be in the studio, which is another huge passion? Or do I have enough time to build stuff, is another huge passion?
Yeah.
So it's like I have to stretch myself between things that I like doing. So I get into these conundrums sometimes.
Well, if there's huge passions in different areas, then my suggestion is that eventually what's going to happen if you follow them is they'll probably
all join together. Yeah. No, thank you for that.
Years ago, like we're talking now, 40, 50,000 years ago, they used to build with sound. You know, like, so, you know, there's different technologies that humans are yet to discover. When I say discovered, it was done in the past, but the technology, you could say, had been lost. Of course, it was also one reason why they destroyed the Earth at that time too. They went too far with the sound, and there was a whole cataclysmic event which meant that Lemuria and Atlantis sunk into the sea. Like, but before then, they were using it to a degree in harmony, and then after a while, they took it too far and destroyed half the planet.
No, thank you guys. Appreciate that. Good answer.
Yeah, it was interesting when we were away because, you know, we would talk about principles for 3 or 4 or sometimes for 18 hours straight, over 3 days. And then someone would come up at the end of the group, oh, I don't think you covered anything to do with my question. The principles cover every question. It's sort of, and this is the beauty of the principles, is that once you start understanding how everything is linked to a principle, you start understanding how principles answer so many questions all at once. And to understand a principle is the most economical way for you to progress. So if you focus on your emotions, it's not an economical way to progress. And the reason why is because you frequently will try to compromise principles in order to understand or feel your emotions. And under those circumstances, you obviously, in compromising the principle, more sin is committed, and therefore more pain and suffering will be experienced, even though you're feeling emotions. So the average person doesn't really grasp at this stage how the principles apply to every situation, not just to one situation. But if once you start grasping that, you can apply them to every situation and find an improvement, a rapid improvement in your life by applying them to every situation. Right? And this is what I'd like to encourage you to do from now on, is to start examining some of the principles. As we said to Jad earlier, study them. Like, so when you look at the principle of truth, so remember we've mentioned the 5 main principles. So look at the principle of truth, for example. Study it. What are the aspects of it? What does honesty mean? What does transparency mean? How is that experienced emotionally, not just intellectually?
Feel like?
What does it feel like to be transparent emotionally, to be transparent spiritually, to be transparent sexually, to be honest emotionally, spiritually, sexually, physically? What does it look like? And then, like I said to Jad, create some practicals, some experiments for yourself. So you put that into practice in your day-to-day life and then see what happens, right? And measure what happens so that you can gain some faith in it, right? Because unless you do it, you're not going to have much faith in it. Unless you take the action. So for many people, they're hearing divine truth and they're initially very interested in hearing it, but unfortunately not very interested in practicing it. Right? And the main reason why is because there's a lack of understanding of how beneficial the principles are in terms of your life. Because once you grasp how beneficial the principles are in your life, you'll want to. The worst thing you could think of is to not do it, right? And this is the contrast we see a lot, where people listen to divine truth, don't do it, and then of course they walk away from it just like they walked away from any other teaching they ever had in their life, and primarily it's because they didn't want to engage the principles and put them in day-to-day practice. And we have all sorts of addictive reasons, you could say sinful reasons, as to why we don't want to put things in practice. But all of them are selfish, because they all involve our feelings. They all involve, I don't want to feel this, and I don't want to feel that, and I'd rather feel this, and I'd rather feel that. And all of those things are selfishly motivated, all of those thoughts are selfishly motivated. And so, you know, it doesn't make any sense to me to listen to divine truth and then to discard the principles in your day-to-day life, because divine truth is the principles. Because divine truth is God's truth. God's truth is God's nature, God's personality being expressed through God's laws, and God's laws are all based upon the principles that are a part of God's personality. Like, so it's all about the principles. Right? You won't receive love from God unless you really have some focus on the principles. Right? You receive some love at the beginning, potentially, but it's not going to be continuous unless you start looking at some principles and getting your life and putting your life and into harmony with the practice of those principles. And of course, the more love you receive from God, the easier that is to do, because the more love you receive, the more you automatically start changing in harmony with the principles. But it also does require some investigation on your part, some interest on your part, some desire. So when I say to people, seek first the kingdom or seek the truth, you think of the word seek. It doesn't mean sit on your backside and just wait for it to come to you, does it? It doesn't mean that, does it? It means you've got to do something in order to obtain. That's what the word seek means. Do something to obtain. So how do you seek first the kingdom? How do you seek first God? Well, you start seeking by discovering God's personality, and you do that by looking at these principles that are a part of God's nature and beginning to try to attempt to understand them yourself. That's how you seek. And unless you seek, no real change is going to happen. Right? And it's interesting that, you know, when a person looks at buying something physically, like let's say you want to buy a new car, the average person does a lot of seeking, don't they? They will investigate one, take it for a test drive, ask questions about it, look all the reviews, look it all up, you know, and then they'll go to some people who know, mechanic maybe, and talk to him as well, and then they go, oh, that right, not exactly what I want, so what's the next car? I'll go to that dealer, test drive that car, how does that feel? We'll look at the repair of the car, look at the cost of involvement in the car, and whatever, and then the next one, and the next one, and you're only spending like, what is it? Well, it's a fair bit nowadays, isn't it, for a car? Yeah. Like, it's a long time since I bought one, so and probably now $50,000 or $60,000 probably is pretty average for a decent sized family car, I suppose. But you're spending that amount of money, which is not the same as you're spending on a house, but it is a significant amount of your funds. But you're seeking a lot to find out what exactly is going to suit you, what exactly is going to, how it all works, what's going to be required of you, and all those things. And that's just with a physical possession. That's got nothing to do, hardly anything to do at all, with anything of a spiritual nature, and yet we spend all this time investigating it. Now compare that with how much time you spent investigating what truth is.
Truth feels like that.
And you can see there's often a large shortfall, isn't there, between what you did trying to find the new car versus what you've done trying to find out what truth is. And I find that very unfortunate, because if we understood the priority being the spiritual matters first, we would spend more time seeking those things, more time attempting to understand them. And this is what we notice. Those of you who are sincere, we notice you spend more time investigating the truth, investigating the principles, investigating, understanding them for yourself. For those of you who are less sincere, you hardly spend any time doing that, to your own detriment, unfortunately, but hardly any time doing that. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is to reappraise your priorities with regard to how you seek and what you seek. And if you can reappraise your priorities and seek first those spiritual matters, seek first the kingdom, seek first God's love, seek first to understand God and God's nature and personality, and understand it to the point where you start understanding these principles, then you're going to receive the benefits of that. And there's going to be benefits that you can't even imagine from that at this stage, right? And the reason why that's true is because God is good, and God wants to give you benefits. God designed the laws to bring you benefits, as well as to correct any bad behaviour. Unfortunately, a lot of times we focus our attention primarily on the bad behaviour, because there's a lot of it. But there are so many benefits from bringing your life into harmony with the truth as well, with God's principles as well. So we'd just like to encourage you to do that. Like, spend more time investigating. Have a bit of time each day if you can. What is truth to you? What does that mean? And if one of the questions we asked some groups overseas were like, if you were more truthful in your life, what would that look like? What areas do you need to improve to become more truthful? And I don't just mean intellectually truthful. I mean emotionally truthful, sexually truthful, spiritually truthful. How would that look in your life? Like, investigate these matters for yourself, because that's you seeking. If you seek, you will find, right? But if you expect somebody else to seek, then it's highly unlikely you're going to find much at all. That's how God designed one of the universe itself. Like, the people who are rewarded the most are the people who sought the most. Right? And you can see that's for good reason, because they are the most sincere. Right? So therefore, there should be a reward for being the most sincere, shouldn't there? Helen?
I see the damage that the false teachings that have come through, the world, have affected the most core thing, which is your relationship with God.
Yeah.
Because, you have this view of God that's, the punishing God, the wrathful God. You don't, they just give lip service to the word love,
Yeah.
God's love. And so if you don't want or have blocks to that relationship, wanting it, then all the other things like principles and stuff, you're not going to want them either.
I don't know about that either, though, Alvin. Like, what I've found in this life, not so much in our life before now, but in this life, what I've found mostly is that there are times when you can recognise within yourself that you have injuries, isn't it? Like, you can see, yes, I've been brought up in a way where I have a tainted view of love, or I've been brought up in a way where I believe truth's not that important, or been brought up in a way where I'd rather take no action than take some action, or, with regard to those core things in particular. Brought up in a way where I don't really have faith in goodness, things like that. You can often see that in yourself. So if you see it, then why not do something about it? Like, so just because you have these injuries, it doesn't have to determine the choices that you make from now on. And so I don't agree that the past determines your future, because if it did, very few of us would have a very good future ahead of us, to be honest. So if God's designed it in such a way that what determines your future is your faith In other words, what you have faith in. And you can change that at any moment. And it's not dependent upon your past. It's not dependent upon how you were brought up or what you were taught to believe or any of those things. What it's dependent upon is you developing faith in something and then deciding to learn more about that thing that you develop faith in. And it's fantastic that that's true, like, because if that wasn't true, fundamentally none of us could change, right?
So will is a lot of part of that as well. It's very important.
Yeah, you could say
Using
faith is
will
a
and
sub-aspect
desire.
of will, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because faith is what you have desiring for your future, right? So a lot of it's about developing a desire for your future that then causes you to investigate things. So let's say I've been brought up to have a very corrupt view of God. Let's say I feel God's a punishing God and he's treats me terribly and he's going to nitpick with me with every single thing, and then whenever there's a problem, he will not only punish me for that problem, but he'll punish me forever for that problem. And if we're brought up with those kind of beliefs, obviously that's going to have an impact on us. But you can change that belief. You can investigate whether that belief is true or not.
Yeah. Because once you have the awareness that maybe that's not true, even intellectually, then free will the gift of free will gives you the capacity to investigate that. Now, when we don't want to investigate that, there's usually another reason that's not actually to do with what we were taught about God.
That's right.
It's about I shouldn't have to feel hard emotions, or it's something other than the truth about God. Because God wants us to know God's nature and character. So when we start seeking that sincerely, we will have a changed view of God. Even if we were raised on hellfire and damnation, we will change. But usually there's a reason why we don't want to change. We're invested in, and it's usually got nothing to do with actually God per se.
Or your history either.
Or your history, because anyone coming from a horrible history, and many of you do, whenever there's the hope of a better future, you're like, okay, let's go for it. It's not like you're like, I want to stay in my horrible past. But usually there's other reasons why we don't take that course, and they are more selfish reasons.
Yeah, so maybe we can give a physical illustration of that. Let's say you've never had fruit your entire life, and you don't even know what it tastes like, and you only believe you can have potatoes. That's all you had when you were growing up, and that's all you got. Bread or something like that. Dumplings, and you've never had fruit your entire life. Somebody offers it to you. Does the past have to determine whether you'll take that or not? Can you see it doesn't really determine it, does it? What's going to determine it is whether you're prepared to take a risk, prepared to investigate, prepared to, feel some things potentially. Who knows? That's what it's going to determine, isn't it? Whether you take that fruit or not. Yeah. So you could, in a way, you could liken God's truth to fruit, like that you've never had before, and your preparedness to take it is not going to be determined by your past. Yeah. It's going to be determined by other factors, such as are you willing to take a risk? Are you willing to experiment? Are you willing to
disagree with other people?
Yeah.
Put in some effort.
Are you willing to make mistakes? Are you willing to try something?
Feel pain. Feel fear.
Yeah. So you've got to be very careful, Owen, about using the excuse about your future that your past is determining it. This is a very common thing people do, but it's very dangerous for your future. Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes what I notice from yourself and your questions is that you're very afraid of dealing with your emotions. Right? So you have a desire for truth while at the same time being afraid to deal with emotions. And at the moment, the fear of emotion is higher than your desire to practice truth. Your desire to hear the truth is up there, above your emotions. You're willing to hear it, but when it comes to practicing it, the desire to practice it is down here compared to your emotions. You follow? So on one hand, you're willing to hear it, but not practice it. And because your emotions are going to be at the level they are, whatever is inside you is now inside of you, and there's nothing you can do about that but let it out. And that's the emotion that's in you. If your desire to practice truth is down here still, no matter how much truth you listen to, if your desire to practice it is down here still, it's not going to happen for you. There's not going to be a change. And that's the problem you face right now, is that your desire to practice it, because you're so worried about these emotions, the desire to practice it is too low compared to the fear of the emotions. You follow? But it's interesting, you still keep listening, still keep listening, 10 years later you're still listening,
And
15 years later still listening.
you're someone who as you know, you love truth. It enlivens you. It's not just like, oh, I quite like this.
No, you love hearing it.
That's what I mean. You love this process of
You
hearing
don't
it.
love practicing it.
You don't love practicing it, but this is part of the some of the pain you're in is because you are fighting something that is a part of you. This light up about truth, I don't want to practice it. Light up about truth, I don't. You're at war, and some of these emotions are actually about that.
Yeah. And so the principle here being, of course, that you can understand one thing about a certain matter, such as truth, in that you want to hear it, but at the same time, you can also be in a place that's completely opposite the principle when it comes to practicing it, right? And this is what often determines whether a person progresses or not. There's many people around the world we find that love to hear truth. Many. There's very few that love to practice it. They love it so much that they realise that practicing is going to benefit them in every case.
And they realise that you can't really love truth unless you practice it.
Yeah.
You know, as you explore the love and truth principle, you realise, well, it's not just hearing, it's living truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're overseas, for example, we would have met close to 800 people while we're overseas. Of that, we probably met 10 who love to practice what we taught. Maybe 10. The rest love to hear it. But of course, hearing it doesn't benefit you, right, unless you're prepared to practice it. There'll be no real change if you just hear it and don't do anything. Right? There's plenty of people, if you think about the amount of people who have now heard divine truth on earth over the last 20 years, it'd be in the hundreds of thousands and maybe even close to 1 million people or so. But of that, like less than 0.0001% want to practice it. Right? Why not? Why don't they want to practice it? It's because their fear of dealing with something emotionally is higher than their desire to practice it is. Okay? And that's why very few people experience the happiness that comes from practicing it. It's because they don't practice it, and as a result, they're never going to benefit from hearing it. This is a common problem all through history that I've seen. Like, there's a quote in the Bible of me saying, which I did actually say, it was a quote that I had from the book of Isaiah, where it actually said that there are many people who hear, but no one listens. Like, no, they don't listen with their heart and get the sense of it and want to apply it in their life, right? They hear it, and many people are attracted to hearing truth. You know, men and women, by the way, not just women or not just one gender. When we were away, it was equal, and sometimes, yeah, almost
exactly
50% of the audience were
I
men,
sat there and
50% women. In every audience, right? There's many men and women who want to hear it. But when it comes to practicing it, very few people want to practice it. Ironically, a bit more women than men want to practice it. And you can understand some of the reasons why that would be the case. Once you understand how many men have been brought up emotionally, you know. But still not a lot of people want to practice it. Not to the extent where their whole life is changed. Not to that extent. And that's why, you know, in the first century we called the truth the way, God's way, the way. And the reason why is it is the way, like the way to live your entire life way. Not just something to hear and go away and go, oh, that was amazing, and then not put it into practice.
One of the things you said on that trip somewhere
Yeah.
was that you cannot, you know, it's been sitting around in my head, you can't really know the truth until you feel the love that's, you know. And I think, do you mean the love of God or just...
Well, the love that's in every principle, God's love herself, you know, her love, but also the love that's in every principle that is within her personality, and therefore the love that's within every principle within the law. You know, unless you start feeling these things, you're not going to be like constantly attracted to it. Like, you think about God's truth, you know, if you think about when you first came to listen to Mary or me speak, right? The very first time the average person, particularly when we start talking about the universe and how the universe works and how everything, you know, the whole process of incarnation and how all that works and all of these things about the spirit world and how that works, and everybody's quite fascinated with all of that, aren't they? It's like, wow, it's like, this is so amazing, it's so good to know this stuff. But it's only when the truth becomes personalised internally that it's actually going to benefit you. So you can listen to all this stuff, but it's not really going to benefit you personally until it becomes a part of you inside of you, and then you live your life by it. That's the only time it really benefits you personally. So most people who've listened to divine truth, some for many, many years, have never made it a part of themselves internally. And so they're fascinated, as, you know, oftentimes you see them 5 years later and they're still fascinated by the truth, but they're not living it. It's not a part of their life personally, and so they never experience the amazing benefits of living it, ever. You know, they're just amazed by the theory of it, you could say. It's almost like going to college or going to a university, listening to all the theory and going, that was amazing. And then there's the end of your degree. No practice, no practicals, no experiments, no putting it into action. Imagine that. It'd be like, oh, well, I've got a degree, but has it benefited you? Not at all, because you're not doing it, right? You're not practicing it. So the only way that you're going to practice, you're going to benefit from your education is by putting it into practice. That's the only way. But that's also where the most people have the most fear about dealing with their feelings. Right? They worry too much about their feelings. Right? Their feelings are too important to them. And so the feelings, because they're so important, you know, we're listening to the truth, so that's important to us. That's more important than our feelings oftentimes. A lot of you have had bad feelings when you've heard some truths, all right? Initially, you've got, like, you hear the truth about abortion or something, or you hear the truth about, you know, reincarnation not being true, or, you know, many of you have been brought up to believe it is, and so, you know, they're crushing is a general feeling, but you're still wanting to hear it. But as soon as it means putting it in something into practice, the emotions start taking over because they are of higher priority. Your fear of the emotion is higher priority. And so that takes over, and that now dominates whether you're going to put it into practice or not. And so the net result is all of this stuff you could be practicing is just really stored in you as intellectual concepts and ideas. That's all it is. It's not heart motivated yet, because it hasn't motivated you enough to deal with the fear of your feelings and just get on with it. right? And that's where most people who hear truth initially fall down. And when I say initially, oftentimes not a long thing. When I say not a long thing, it might be 100 years or two. But oftentimes what we see happen is a person initially hears some things, not willing to practice it. Hears some more things, not willing to practice it. Hears some more things, not willing to practice it. Hears some more things, not willing to practice it. Until they get to a stage where their pain and suffering of their own life is so great, they go, maybe I should practice it. Right? And then they put it into practice and there's relief. And they go, why didn't I do this before? Right? That's the general response. And in the spirit world, that happens all the time. Like there's people who have asked us to come and talk to them. We go and talk to them. Oh no, I don't want to hear that. Don't want to hear that. Don't want to hear that. You know, who do you think you are? Don't want to hear that. And that kind of thing. And then 100 or 2 years later, you meet them again. And they go, I wish I'd listened earlier. I wish I put it into practice earlier. Because there's a loss of time, right? Which is really the only thing you can't get back. Yeah, the loss of time. And so this is where most people experience their regrets. Is that they realise they were in so much worry about their feelings that they eventually did not take the actions they could have taken, which then of course meant that they didn't experience the benefits of what they could have done. And that's where you're going to experience most of your regret in your future. Is any of the things you were offered and you didn't take because you were afraid? That's where it's going to be the problem for the most part. So we'd like to encourage you to put it into practice rather than just listen. Yeah? And, you know, like I said, we often talk, you know, in terms of any one audience, you might see in an audience of 100 people, you might see 1 or 2 people who are sincere enough to put it into practice. Most people love it, talk about it, wonder about it. You know, we go out socially with them, and they're still talking about it. You know, it's like every day they're talking about it when you're there. Like every day they're talking about it, but we see them the next year and nothing's changed. And you go, what happened? And well, they're going, well, it's just too hard. Just too hard to put into practice. But you see, the trouble with that kind of thinking is that when you put it into practice, you then recognise benefits. But if you don't put it into practice and just think it's too hard, you'll never recognise the benefits. So now you're going to think it's too hard with no benefits. Right? It's only when you put it into practice that you realise, oh, it's not that hard, and also there's lots of benefits. Even if it is sometimes hard, there's plenty of benefits. so why wouldn't you go for the benefits, you know? And so, yeah, that's what we see happening all the time, hey?
Yes.
Yeah. Brittany?
I was just interested in something that you said before, and I was wondering if you might be able to talk a little bit more on it. And you said, what determines your future is what you have faith in, and you can change that at any moment.
Yep.
Is it like just a choice?
Yep. But it's a heartfelt one.
Yes.
It's not going to be something you can do in your head. So how do you make a heartfelt choice is the question, I suppose, isn't it? What's the difference between a head choice and a heart choice? We understand the difference.
Only that, like, your heart choice is your feelings. Like, you feel like you're more pulled by your feelings than just what you think you should do.
Is that true? Because aren't most of your addictions feelings? So is it actually true that if you follow your feelings that you're going to be making a heart choice? Not necessarily, is it? But,
and if you're in a state of sin, and it's necessary that you make a heart choice to get out of sin, then your sin's not driving that choice, is it?
That's right. So your feelings are not driving the choice, something else has to be. Makes sense to you. So you think about your addictions, they're all feelings, aren't they? Right. So let's say in your life, you recently had an addiction to have a child with you. Yep. As an example of and when I say it's addiction, I can prove that it is one. But we'll just start with the fact that it was a desire, a feeling that you had. You saw a child in need, isn't it? Like
Yep.
Miss Savannah?
Yep.
Saw a child in need, and then you decided, I would like to take care of that child.
Yep.
Right? But you weren't honest with yourself yet about why you felt that particular child was more in need than any other child. Because what was unique about that child? You know?
I feel like I know where you're going with it.
We've had a conversation.
We have.
So
I'm not asking you to agree though. Like, what's your opinion? What was the reasons why you felt that particular child?
Yeah, because I wasn't like initially going to be doing what I ended up doing.
Yeah.
And I felt, because I knew her, I knew her.
How did you know her? You hardly spend any time with her.
Yeah. I spent a bit of time with her, working with her.
Yeah, a little
But,
bit, but
yeah.
hardly any.
Yeah.
In comparison to 24 a day.
Yep.
24 hours a day.
And I felt like she'd ended up in a bad situation that she shouldn't be in at that age, I suppose.
Well, that's true, but so is every other child you met.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. I suppose the difference for me was that she ended up in resi, which was different from every other child.
No, there's other children in resi, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yep.
Just not as young, I suppose.
Resi, by the way, for the sake of the recording, is residential care, but yeah.
So your feeling was she's so much younger than
Too
the other
young.
kids.
Yeah.
She's too young to
to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Yeah, see, that's not what I'd call honest,
okay.
because there's a whole heap of other reasons.
Yeah.
You let yourself feel what you feel. Like, why look after a child? What's the reason you wanted to look after a child? Can I ask you now, you now realise looking after a child's hard.
Yeah.
What do you want to do now? Honestly.
A lot of the time I don't want to do it.
Correct. See, if you really wanted it in your heart, whether it was hard or not, you'd still want it. But now, when it's hard, your heart's not wanting it. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, that it wasn't like it's not in my heart as a heartfelt desire.
No, but it was feeling based, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Can you see the difference? Like,
Yeah.
you felt to do it, you wanted
Strong
to do it,
feelings,
strong
yes.
feelings to do it, but
Yeah.
you even changed a large part of your life to do it.
Yeah.
So you had strong feelings to do it, but the fact is when it got hard, you now feel a lot of times you don't want to do it, which indicates that the strong feelings you had to do it weren't heart-based. What were they based on? They've got to have been based on some addictions, right?
Yeah.
Because the problem with addictions is when you don't get them met, you don't want to do the thing anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas the good thing about principle is whether you get any addiction met or not, you don't care.
Yeah.
You just want to engage the principle. You understand the difference?
It's like I think I said it to you. Like when you decide I want to love this child, regardless
Of how hard it's going to be.
whatever happens, how hard
And
it's
she's
going
in
to be.
residential care, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Like I know you probably thought it wasn't going to be as hard as it is now, but that's a very unrealistic feeling. She's in care already. She's already had a difficult life, for obviously the parents that don't care about it, otherwise she wouldn't be there. Obviously the government has taken her off of her parents for a reason,
And that's pretty extreme
which is pretty extreme.
in this country.
In this culture, for anybody to be taken away from parents, like I've seen some parents be pretty bad to their children, but they don't get their children taken away from them. You have to be pretty extreme to get your child taken away from you in this culture, and yet so you know, that's indicative of the fact that she was going to have some difficulties, for sure, right? If it was a principled decision, what I'm pointing out to you is that you would not feel now that it's too hard and you don't want to do it.
You might feel it's hard, but you wouldn't feel,
You
I
feel
don't
it's
want
too
to.
hard.
Yeah, yeah.
You feel it's worth it, right? If it was a principled decision. So what I'm suggesting is, even though it was a feeling decision, it was not a principled one. So there's a difference between a heart decision, a principled one, and a decision that's just made to meet certain addictions. Right? There's a big difference between those two things, and you're learning the difference right now.
Yeah.
You're in the process in this situation of learning the difference. On one hand, you thought it would be easier, it'd be smoother, be easy to do, and then and now you're realizing it's not that easy in this situation, and it's going to take a lot out of you too, right? It's taking a lot out of your life that you didn't think it would take out of your life before you began, and that's because you had certain addictions about children rather than. But then there's this whole other aspect that hasn't even been considered, and that is why Savannah. And it's the reason why is because you recognised yourself in Savannah. You recognised your own self from your own childhood in Savannah. The spirit influence in her life, you recognised in Savannah. In your life, you recognised in Savannah. So there was a deeper connection with this particular child because of a lot of history, experiences you've had, which she reminded you of. Right? And you feel you can't solve them in yourself, but you think you might be able to solve them in this child. And I put to you, you can't solve them in this child unless you solve them in yourself. You understand? Yeah. And there's something you haven't understood until now. But this is all part of making the principled decision versus the addictive decision.
Yeah, I know just that you're now facing almost every day now, do I make a principled decision? And if I do, what does that really mean? And
what does that look like?
You're actually coming to see, through your lived experience, I cannot help this child unless I deal with my own.
Yeah.
That's what a principled decision to love her is, that I must deal with the ways that I am like this, or the way I've been harmed like this. Otherwise, I just don't know what to do, or whatever I do doesn't work, or I'm going to want to break a principle, or I'm going to want to meet an addiction.
Now, another aspect of that is you were required to sign a contract when you took the child on. Now, there were things in that contract that you read that broke principles. But you were prepared to break the principle and sign the document. Why?
Yeah, we've talked about this too, but out of wanting to, I guess, save her /
that's saving her is the thing you told yourself.
Yeah.
But you can't save a person out of harmony with a principle.
If you can't enact a principle, how can you actually help them?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what you tell yourself. That's the thing you prefer to tell yourself. What is actually happening? There's this desire, the addiction to have the child was so great that you're willing to compromise a principle in order to attain the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're willing to compromise the principle of, how to manage the child when she's unruly.
Yeah.
Part of the agreement was that you're not allowed to restrict the child in any manner.
Yeah.
Right? Now you know, or you've heard, I should say. Now you know.
Yeah, now I know.
Back then you just heard that restricting a child under certain circumstances is a good thing.
Yeah.
Creating a law, creating a structure, a good thing. And also there's plenty of evidence, as Mary shared with you, even in the world, there's plenty of evidence that actually is true. But you were willing to compromise a principle for the sake of yourself, your own feelings. You're telling yourself that it's for the sake of Savannah, but it wasn't for her sake, it was for your sake. Because if you really felt about it for her sake, you'd realise compromising a principle would never help her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for her sake, we can't compromise the principle. If I love her truly, I can't compromise this principle.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
So you tell yourself you were loving her, but actually you were caring about your addiction more than willing to compromise the principle. So these are examples of where you're feeling a thing, right? You're feeling that you should go ahead with something. So if you just trust your heart, what you call trust your heart is just following your feelings. Can you see it leads you astray, right? What you need to learn to trust is the principle, right? And when it comes to the principle of restricting a child, you now sort of trust that more, right? Because of this experience.
Yes.
But of course now you're in trouble because you signed the document that said you shouldn't do that. So now you've broken that principle where you signed something you said you wouldn't do, and now you're doing it. So you see, so there's a breaking of the principle. But again, if you'd never signed the document and you instead had presented to them evidence at the time saying, no, that's not going to work, and eventually that evidence, they assessed it and they went, oh, you might be right, we'll try a different experiment with you. You might have had her under the terms where you could. You see, because you didn't break the principle, the law would have upheld you and supported your decision to not break the principle, and you never know what good things would have happened as a result of the principle not being broken. But because the principle has been broken, you're not going to experience that now. You see?
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of people sort of get themselves in a state where they say they're following their heart, but actually what they're doing is following the heartfelt addiction. You know, the emotional addiction that they really want.
So if we go back to your original question, which was about like changing your faith in something, and if you think about the situation that you're in, if you can make a heartfelt choice now to have faith in the principle of loving Savannah, and you can see that will change a lot of your actions, won't it? But it might not feel easy.
And it also may result in them taking Savannah away from you. Which will have emotions and emotions to feel about.
But the idea of making a heartfelt choice is about growing what we've been talking about today, growing a love for a principle and deciding to have faith in that, experiment with that, it grows your faith in it. And now you can make a heartfelt choice that's in disharmony with your addiction, and that's how you're going to grow.
The principle must become a reality inside of you for it to work in the end. It can't be just an idea or a concept or an issue of theory. It has to be an actual thing that you feel in your heart that is actually, it's true, that you feel the truth of it. That's how it changes everything. So until the principle is actually written in your heart and actually a part of you, until that point in time, you've got to learn more about it. You've got to experiment more with it. You've got to, until you seek more. And so you get to the stage where the principle is so firm, so strong, so like in your heart in terms of your feelings about it, that now you will never break it. And then you experience the benefits of that. That's when you experience the benefits.
You really experience benefits as you're going through that process too, don't you?
Well, yeah, it's a growing process, but the real benefits come.
The eternal benefits come when it's in your heart.
Yeah. Not just the eternal ones, but the biggest benefits come once it's in your heart, because now it's in your heart, it's not hard to do anymore. You just do it automatically all the time.
You don't have to be in turmoil about it.
You don't even worry about it anymore. So you read a document like that, I can't sign it. You don't even worry about, what the results are going to be anymore. Do you see?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's been a big lesson about not adhering to the principle there. Like I feel gutted that I didn't argue it more or not do it. Like just say it's going to be this or I can't do it.
That's right.
I feel gutted about it now. It could have been so much better.
Yeah, but it still can be, because you still can present evidence and you say, this is why this is not working, this is why this particular child needs this particular thing. You can try to bring it around now. You say, I made a mistake by signing that document saying that because I don't agree with that. Like, I don't agree with that's right. And they can say, well, if you don't agree with it, we take it off, and then you'll have to feel some emotions and feel about that, right?
Yeah.
But you don't know that the law may actually work in your favour. God's law may work in your favour and cause them to ponder some more and give. And of course they have spirits that are trying to help them bring their practices into more harmony with truth as well. And you never know what kind of influences might come about as a result of now you living in more truth about the matter. Does that make sense?
And isn't that already starting to happen? From what you've told me.
Yeah.
But it's just required more effort on your part, it's required you being more vocal, it's required something of you more than just living in a hypocritical state.
Or an addictive state.
Yeah, or an addictive state.
Yeah.
And so this is like almost every example that has ever been presented to me about people's personal lives, where people ask us questions like, how would you solve this problem? How would you solve that problem? Every single issue that's ever raised can be solved with a principle. Absolutely every single one.
But can you see, Brits, even in this conversation, how, like, I can see how you even starting to investigate, even having the, oh, I wish I hadn't have done that, and oh, now what can I do, and us having, me giving you evidence that's societally well documented, researched and scientifically agreed upon, and all of these things, and you've started to take different actions, and there's even been some positive movement there. You've got funding for things that you were told you weren't going to get. You've got not agreement, but you've got, oh well, maybe we can talk about that. You know, these are things that weren't even on the table before, but you're still reluctant to trust the principle. So you're still in that
but
fight.
also, still, in some ways, you're worried about the hard work of it, right? Which is driving the reluctance. Right? And the hard work was always going to be there. And you're not facing the hard work. It was all about your addiction, not about the principle of loving Savannah or loving helping the system become more loving. Do you follow? And the only reason why now you're reticent is because of the hard work that might be involved. Not only with Savannah, but now also with the government, the system.
But that's
remember what we said to Fab earlier. You get to a point where the hard work, what did I say? You get to a point where the hard work is like, how much hard work now is there going to be, type of thing. Do I really want it that much? Do I really want to love that much? Right? And so it's the same decision really. Fab's in or then you're in. It's like, do I really want to love Savannah and also the system itself, like loving it in terms of changing it?
not just one child, but
For all children. Do I love it that much that I'm willing to put myself through this process, like to make that happen? And this is where most people fold. Where most people go, no, no, I can't do that. No, somebody else has to do that first for me. I'm not going to be the one.
And that's why I raised the thing about your reluctance to have faith in the principle, because it's actually the same as what I was saying to Alwyn. You want to say, oh, I don't know if it'll work, I don't know. But really it's actually about what Jesus is saying. It's about, oh no, there'll be work required and emotions for me to feel, and I'm too selfish for that, is the truth. But we want to say, oh, I've got no faith in the principle. And that's a good way of avoiding what's really going on.
And this is where we're disingenuous, where we're insincere, where we're saying to us, oh, our problem's one thing, but actually it's another. And this is a good example of what generally happens for most people. It's you get to a stage where you hit this sort of wall where how much are you willing to love versus and live by the principle versus the trouble it might cause.
As you grow, you learn what is required to love. That's what you've learned. You're like, oh, if I really want to, if I really want to love, if I really want to love, there's all these things, and then you go, do I really want to love?
That much.
Because it requires things of me.
More than I expected. And I thought I'd get a lot more rewards. You know, I thought I'd get a lot more rewards in that. You know, like
Yeah.
that's usually the problem.
Mm. Yes.
All right, guys. Well, it's time for us to finish, I think, for today.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary and I've got some pack ups to do and whatever. So it's good to talk to you about those subjects. We'll talk more about them as we go, probably over the coming weeks. We're not sure about whether every week we've got planned will actually happen yet. We've just got to. Mary and I haven't had much rest at this stage, so it's sort of determining
And
that.
it's taking a lot to set up. We'll see if we can get it more streamlined, but if it's sort of taking 2 days out of our week to sort of set up and then present and then we've got to pack up, we don't have much time for, well, we've got to do a lot of other things in the rest of the time too.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But so just check on
I'll keep you posted.
the event.
If you're registered, then I'll send you an email if it's cancelled.
Yeah.
That's the way to go.
Yeah. No worries, guys. Well,
Thank you.